Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Today, we'll examine what happened in Norris City, Illinois. Jacob Wheeler, 22, and his girlfriend Jessica Evans, 17, went fishing in the small Wabash River. Their families have been unable to get in touch with them, and they have not gone back home. All residents of Norris City followed the investigation after police were alerted to the couple's disappearance that same day, but sadly, there was no happy ending to the tale. All the locals were shocked by what transpired. Southern Illinois is a patchwork of fertile farmland and thick forests that stretches between Kentucky and Missouri. With a population of just over 1,000, the area is dotted with small villages like White County and Norris City, which make it an excellent place to raise children due to its small size. Hunting and other outdoor pursuits are popular. There are many locations where fishing is popular. Before summer break at school began in 2017, Jessica Evans, then 22 years old, met Jacob Wheeler, who had just moved across the street to live at his brother's house. Jessica and her mother, Chris, lived in a comfortable home. After meeting at a party and striking up a conversation, they fell in love. After 3 years of service in Iraq, Jacob was a quiet country boy trying to rebuild his life. Chris, Jessica's mother, wasn't overly concerned about the fact that Jacob was 5 years older than Jessica. She had faith in him. Jessica requested permission from her mother on August 26, 2012, to take Jacob fishing at night in a popular location on the small Wabash River. At first, Chris was opposed to the idea, but after Jessica persuaded her, he agreed. She warned her daughter not to spend too much time out. On a nearby street lived Megan, Jessica's older sister, and her son Miles. Jessica had to watch her son at 5 a.m. the following day, while Megan had to leave for work. Chris, Jessica's mother, reminded her that she needed to return home by 5 a.m. before Jessica left to go fishing. Although Jessica had no way of knowing that this fishing trip would be her final one, she responded that she remembered that and would be at her sister's house by then. Jessica was heading to bed when Chris called her just before midnight to check on her. At 5 o'clock the following morning, Chris discovers that her youngest daughter has not returned home, despite Jessica's assurances that she was all right and that she and Jacob were nearly finished fishing and would be home shortly. Jessica was not known for being late, especially when she knew she had to watch her nephew. Jessica didn't answer when Chris picked up her cell phone and began calling her daughter. Chris's text messages also went unanswered. Chris knew right away that something wasn't right. She was certain that she would have alerted Jessica if her plans had changed. When Chris arrived at Jacob's house, his brother Jeremy informed him that Jacob had also not returned home. By 9 in the morning, Jessica's family was starting to worry, but Jeremy wasn't concerned because he knew Jacob could take care of himself. Chris feared they were stranded somewhere or that Jacob's pickup had broken down. Chris finally called the White County Sheriff's Office after the couple had not been seen for 12 hours. Sheriff Doug Mayer wasn't overly worried when he got the call about the missing couple on Sunday night while he was lounging around his house. Maybe Jacob and Jessica had escaped, he thought. He needed to know where they had disappeared to, but he assumed they were safe. In order for the phone company to track down Jessica's cell phone, the sheriff chose to execute a warrant to search it, which could take hours. Meanwhile, as instructed by the family, the sheriff's deputies went to the fishing spot where Jessica and Jacob were expected to be. There were only gravel roads leading to the remote location. A 50-foot overgrown trail led the deputies to a popular fishing location. There were clear indications that someone had visited. Although there were a few packages, there were no indications of any criminal activity or problems. Although the campfire had been extinguished, the area was extremely clean. Jacob had left his pickup truck behind. The sheriff had trusted his instincts about the young couple thus far. He didn't initially think that something negative had occurred. He did believe that they had most likely traveled somewhere voluntarily. Ultimately, Jessica's cell phone carrier provided the records to the sheriff's deputies. Attempting to track the phone and determine which tower it was closest to was a great way to locate them. They discovered that a tower in the campground area was the source of the signal. That was the implication. Jessica was somewhere close to where she and Jacob had gone fishing, and her phone was still on. The sheriff was not prepared for it at all. If Jessica and Jacob are still alive, why aren't they returning their calls if the couple had just fled? The news that Jessica and Jacob were missing spread swiftly throughout Norris City, raising concerns among the locals as investigators started to worry that the two were stranded somewhere, gravely hurt, or worse. When the sheriff's office discovered that Jessica's cell phone was still in the area where the couple had gone night fishing, they became concerned that something horrible had happened. At dawn the following day, officers from the White County Sheriff's Office returned to the fishing site with a platoon of volunteers and neighboring law enforcement agencies. The search party set out to look for any sign of Jacob and Jessica, and their families also joined in the search, but after 3 hours of searching, they found nothing. Jessica, Jacob, and the pickup truck were nowhere to be seen. The pickup had to be there, though, even if something were to happen to Jacob and Jessica. However, what if they abandoned the phones and fled? They would eventually leave an electronic trail if they did flee together. While the bank statements showed nothing noteworthy, the police checked their bank cards to see if there had been any payments. However, one clue was found in Jessica's phone records. Investigators were able to identify the number's owner after Jessica reportedly had another phone conversation shortly after the midnight call from her mother, which occurred at around 12:30 a.m. on Sunday night. Jessica was conversing with Ron Woodison, a young man. The police knew that name because Ron had previously run afoul of the law. This in and of itself raised suspicions that he might have been involved, so they decided to speak with Ron and find out the specifics of that conversation. When he met with the sheriff's deputies, they asked him to describe the last time he had spoken to Jessica. Eventually, he acknowledged that he had called her in the middle of the night. He mentioned that he had attended the party and that some other people had also been present. Ron stated that he had attempted to invite Jessica to the party by calling her. Ron was just informed by Jessica that she was occupied with fishing. He had been told not to call Jessica by Jacob when he reached for the phone, and Ron claims that they had a rather heated exchange. Jacob was mostly to blame. The fact that Ron had called his girlfriend really annoyed him. Jacob was quite irritated by his call. The other partygoers' names were noted by the sheriff's deputies, who also verified Ron's alibi, and essentially attested to the fact that he remained there following that phone call. As the weary search team members were ready to head home at the end of the day without discovering anything, one of Jacob's friends, using his ATV, discovered a pickup truck in the woods. Jacob and Jessica were fishing 2 miles away from the pickup, which was parked in the woods behind an old deserted farmhouse. Jacob had the pickup. It was obvious that a horrible event had occurred. A woman's body was in the back of the truck. Her head had been shot twice. Her condition was another reason to be concerned. She had some clothes on. Investigators were immediately convinced that there had been more than a murder when they discovered some of her clothing on the ground near the car. In a community like this one, it wasn't necessary for the victim to have identification because some of the investigators had known Jessica for their entire lives, and they had just discovered her. Almost 36 hours after Jessica failed to show up to watch her nephew, everything changed in that instant. She was shot and found dead in Jacob's abandoned pickup truck by the sheriff's office. Given that she was nearly completely naked, it was clear that she had intercourse with a man prior to her passing and opposed it. Authorities hoped the coroner would be able to apprehend the offenders if that was the case. While police searched the area surrounding the pickup truck for evidence, they were fortunate to find DNA. It is clear that Jessica's 2 head wounds were consistent with the .222 caliber shell casings. It was clear that Jessica had been shot where the pickup truck was parked, because the 2 shell casings were discovered on the right side of the vehicle, next to a sizable blood stain. Investigators started looking into Jacob's pickup. The oddest thing was that Jacob wasn't there, even though it was packed with personal belongings and fishing equipment. When the police searched, they found a clue. They discovered blood inside the pickup truck's driver's side cab. Samples of blood were sent for DNA analysis. They had to find Jacob, and they had to determine who owned it. The police couldn't help but wonder if Jacob was the person who had shot Jessica, or if he was just another victim. In an attempt to locate Jacob, police kept searching the area. They had to think of him more as a suspect at the time. Doubts weren't limited to the investigators. There were some members of the community who thought Jacob was involved in Jessica's situation. Many conjectured that Jacob had been trained to kill after years of service in the army. Maybe it was Ron's late-night phone call that triggered Jacob. When Jacob believed he was going to lose Jessica, investigators started to wonder what kind of mood he might have been in. The police secured a search warrant for Jacob's brother's home the day after Jessica's body was found. They made a significant discovery, but they were unable to locate Jacob who they assumed was hiding in the house. One of the firearms was absent from his collection, which investigators discovered. The brother of Jeremy Jacob clarified that there was no reason to be alarmed. All his brother was doing was getting ready for a fishing trip. It was nothing out of the ordinary. When investigators learned that the missing firearm was a .22 caliber, which matched the shell casings discovered at the crime scene, they became concerned. Jacob's family, however, thought he had nothing to do with the crime. They had no doubt that if Jessica had been in danger, Jacob would have given his life to save her. The hunt for Jacob Wheeler became a massive operation as the week went on. Search teams were assembled by police officers from multiple counties, and every effort was made to locate him. The search was conducted using canine services, and an aircraft was launched for surveillance. A $2,000 reward was offered by the White County Crime Suppression Unit for information that would result in Jacob's apprehension and arrest. There was some interest in the cash reward, and tips started coming in to the sheriff's office. Out of all the tips, one particularly noteworthy one claimed that Jacob had been spotted at a gas station. According to a worker at the gas station 12 miles from the scene of Jessica's death, he thought Jacob had purchased a pack of cigarettes. He was wearing a camouflage hooded sweatshirt on Sunday night, approximately one day after he and Jessica vanished. The gas station employee recalled that when the man took money out of his wallet, he also found an ID card inside, which he thought was in Jacob Wheeler's name. Because of this, Jacob was clearly the most likely suspect in Jessica's incident, and the likelihood that he was evading capture increased over time. The gas station where Jacob was allegedly spotted was visited by investigators. They noticed a suspicious man in the surveillance footage. He avoided looking at the camera and wore a hooded sweatshirt that covered his face. Although it was suspicious and the night was too hot for a warm jacket, it was difficult to confirm that it was Jacob. The man hurried off to buy cigarettes. The man's face was not visible in the gas station's surveillance footage, but a second camera outside captured him boarding a female driver's vehicle. One of the sheriff's deputies recognized the woman, and they drove right to her home. While speaking with investigators, they noticed that the vehicle seen on the gas station's CCTV footage was parked close to the residence. Although the woman acknowledged that she had driven the man to the gas station, she denied that it was Jacob Wheeler. It was her boyfriend, she claimed. They were extremely disappointed when they first saw her boyfriend. It was someone who resembled Jacob Wheeler, but it wasn't him. In the video, the unidentified man is a dead end. Jacob was still the center of the police's attention. The detectives suspected that his brother Jeremy was hiding him and were certain he was still alive. His brother and father were certain that Jacob couldn't have killed Jessica, so they searched his house at night in an attempt to catch him off guard. But even after a second search, they couldn't find any evidence that he was home. Wheeler wanted his son's name cleared. It was difficult because he was certain that he was searching for Jacob's body rather than his own. Harold, Jacob's father, called Sheriff Meyer 6 days after the disappearance to inform him that he had found something that everyone else had missed. Just a quarter mile from Jacob and Jessica's campsite, he claimed to have spotted what appeared to be auto parts in a wooded area. When investigators looked into this information, they did discover some auto parts. These were components that were fastened to the pickup's fenders. It was definitely not Jacob Wheeler's pickup truck, but there was damage to the trees in the area where they found these parts, indicating that someone had driven the pickup into the woods and between the trees, damaging the vehicle. The investigators had no other leads and were unsure if the find was related to the crime, but it was unquestionably of interest. There was a serial number on one of the parts. The police were able to identify the exact type of pickup truck by looking it up online. Once more, locating this truck in a small city cannot be difficult. A man who drives a car like this was known to one of the sheriff's deputies. It was White County native Danny Costin, a 36-year-old electrician. Could he have been a part of such a violent crime, though? Danny was never one to cause trouble. His criminal history was clean. He lived in White County and was easily located. Investigators made the decision to speak with Danny at his place of employment. In the parking lot was his pickup truck. The parts discovered in the woods matched the truck's extensive damage. Sheriff Meyer questioned Danny while the investigator examined the pickup truck. He inquired about his pickup truck's damage. Danny clarified that he had attempted to fish on the small Wabash River but struggled to get the boat started due to his extreme drunkenness. He remembered the date, but not much else about the evening. It was around 1 in the morning on the night that Jacob and Jessica went fishing. and he reported that during his entire stay in that section of the river, he never saw anyone else. In the meantime, researchers made a significant finding. In the rear of Danny's pickup truck, they discovered a significant amount of blood. When they told him about it, he appeared taken aback. The sheriff advised Danny that this would be a good time to tell him anything he wanted to. Analysis revealed that the blood in the back of Danny's pickup truck was human blood, despite Danny's claim that he witnessed Jacob shoot Jessica twice while he was in the woods that evening. Danny was taken to the police station and subjected to additional interrogation by investigators. He claimed to be intoxicated. He saw Jacob and Jessica when he descended to the small Wabash River. He was alone with Jessica because Jacob had gone into the woods. According to Danny, Jessica allegedly began approaching him on her own. He claimed that he and Jessica drove off in his truck and parked behind an old deserted farmhouse 2 miles away. They allegedly made intimate consenting contact. Then, as Danny said, Jacob discovered them in the dark. After he and Jessica got into a fight, Jacob shot Jessica. Danny claims that he was afraid when he saw Jacob approaching and managed to grab him, which led to a struggle between them. The gun went off somehow, wounding Jacob. According to Danny, the shot was unintentional. Panic set in. He loaded Jacob into his pickup truck. He concealed the body where no one could find it because he was worried that no one would believe him when he claimed it was self-defense. Danny gave a detailed account of where he had left Jacob's body. Danny's story was disbelieved by the police. Jessica didn't seem likely to do that. Although Danny's account of Jessica accompanying him and Jacob unexpectedly appearing didn't make much sense, they now knew that Danny had shot Jacob, proving that Jacob's family was correct all along. Danny Costin was taken to jail after being arrested. The investigators then proceeded to the location where Danny claimed to have left Jacob's body. They had to venture a bit farther into the woods because it was a dirt road. They searched for 6 days before locating Jacob, who had been shot in the head. The evidence they discovered did not support Danny Costin's account of what transpired that evening. The driver's seat and the door of Jacob's pickup were covered in blood, and it was Jacob's blood. Danny's story simply didn't fit it. He claimed that after Jacob killed Jessica, they got into a fight in the woods, and Jacob was accidentally shot and killed. According to what Danny had previously said, he loaded the body into the back of his own pickup truck and drove it to a faraway place. So where did Jacob's pickup truck's interior contain blood? After being reinterrogated, Danny Costin agreed to tell the truth after being made aware of discrepancies in his testimony. He claims that the woods were too dense when he attempted to drive his truck to the water that evening in order to launch the boat. He was also inebriated. He attempted to enlist the aid of Jacob and Jessica. When Jacob realized he was intoxicated, he advised against it. Then Danny requested assistance from the couple to get home. Jacob concurred. Danny climbed into the back of Jacob's pickup truck after he and Jessica got inside. For some reason, he chose to use his .22 caliber pistol. He got out of the truck's back and left. Through the downed window, the driver shot Jacob in the head. Everything took place in front of Jessica. She began to scream out of terror. Then he pulled Jacob out of the truck, Danny said. He swore under interrogation that he had no idea why he killed Jacob or what he was doing. Danny was then informed by Jessica that she would stop at nothing to prevent him from killing her. Danny Costin was questioned by the sheriff about whether Jessica had promised to have sex with him in return for his allowing her to live. Costin answered, "She promised to follow my instructions." He went to a remote location. He basically took Jessica's attempt to protect herself as an invitation to have a personal relationship with him. He did it in Jacob's pickup truck's back. Then he pulled out a gun and shot Jessica, even though she begged for her life. "I don't know why I did it," Costin said. He threw both his and Jacob's guns out the window after loading Jessica's body into the back of Jacob's pickup truck and driving his own vehicle to Wayne County to conceal Jacob's body. Neither gun was ever found by the police. Danny Costin entered a not guilty plea when he appeared in court on September 4, 2012. An appeals court dismissed his attempt to retract his testimony, arguing that he was not informed of his rights prior to being questioned. Police had ample evidence to support Danny Costin's confession, and video recordings of the interrogation verified that Danny was informed of his rights. His DNA was found on Jessica's body, and his truck contained Jacob's blood. In January 2014, a jury convicted Danny Costin's girlfriend, Candace Brown, age 31, of lying to the police during the preliminary investigation. She gave Costin a fictitious alibi. On August 20, 2013, Danny Costin was found guilty, and Brown was sentenced to 60 days in jail, 30 months probation, 100 hours of community service, and a payment of various court costs and fines. He received a 53-year prison sentence. Judge Tom Foster felt that Costin should have received a more severe sentence, but he acknowledged that he was constrained by the state and defense's agreement. According to the court, "You killed these two individuals. There is no pardon or justification for that, not in this world or any other." According to the judge, Costin consented to forgo a jury trial in return for fewer charges and a lighter sentence in the event of a conviction. Harold Wheeler, Jacob's father, stated that he never thought his son, who was named by law enforcement as a person of interest in Jessica Evans' death, was capable of committing such a crime. Foster claimed that the court only accepted the agreement because the victims' families had agreed to it following the hearing. "I was certain that he would never act in this manner. On Sunday, I began searching for him and I never gave up." He claimed that Costin was an acquaintance who lived approximately a quarter-mile away from the Wheeler home and that it was surprising that he was arrested for the killings. "I've had a beer with him while we were sitting at his campsite." Harold Wheeler, clearly in pain, remarked of Costin, "He's been in my house." And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. This video examines the events that occurred in the U.S. state of Washington in 2001. The mother of 8-year-old triplets, Dana Laskowski, 36, was discovered in her own home lying face down on a couch. It was a complicated mystery with multiple suspects for the police. Dana's ex-husband, her boyfriend, and other men were all investigated by detectives. However, this story had an unexpected conclusion, and Dana's family was shocked by the revelation of the truth. Dana Laskowski lived in Puyallup, Washington, a charming, peaceful city with tree-lined streets and nature trails. In 2001, although Puja has a low crime rate and is a safe city, on a typical August 2001 day, police receive a disturbing call regarding one of the city's newest residents. Dana was supposed to get to work at 7:30 a.m., but she never did. She was watching 2 doctors. She is very responsible, so this was really out of the ordinary for her. The police were contacted by her employers to inquire about her well-being. The police showed up at Dana's house at 11 a.m. to check on her. There was no response when they knocked on the door. The back door was open, so they chose to enter the house even though they had checked the perimeter and the windows and saw nothing out of the ordinary. Dana was discovered by the officers under the covers on the living room couch. Her other hand was behind her back as she lay with her head resting on her arm. Sadly, she had passed away. The body was briefly examined by police to check for wounds from gunshots or stab wounds. They saw injuries on her neck, but they didn't find any of it. She had been strangled, judging by the marks. Indeed, there are crime scenes with bloodstains, a victim on the ground, obvious wounds, and possibly a mess everywhere. In Dana's home, that did not occur. Nothing was broken, and there were no weapons. When police turned Dana over, she was face down on the couch. They discovered dried blood around her ears and nose, as well as bruises on her neck. Dana was strangled to death, most likely by her own scarf, according to the medical examiner's ruling. In order to try to identify the murderer, police searched for any trace evidence, DNA, bodily fluids, or other items. Dana's body was in an awkward position on the couch. She wrapped one arm behind her back. She was in a face-down position. This indicated that she and the offender had engaged in combat. The person who did this was strong enough to overcome someone who was actually struggling for her life. It was clear from the facts that the offender was powerful. Dana was not killed, as evidenced by the abrasions on her elbows and knees on the sofa. Blood traces were discovered on the carpet in the living room after forensics applied luminol to it. This meant Dana had been killed on the ground. After that, the murderer picked her up, laid her down on the couch, and wrapped her in a blanket. investigators hypothesized that the murderer was attempting to comfort Dana. In this instance, the fact that she was wrapped in a blanket might suggest that the offender was experiencing regret or guilt. It's possible that the murderer had feelings for Dana. The house wasn't broken into by a random burglar. When searching for suspects, it's critical to consider the possibility that this person knew her. Important information was obtained by the police following the autopsy. Detectives started interviewing neighbors, and one of them claimed to have heard a woman's screams coming from around 1 a.m. This gave police their first idea of the time frame. The medical examiner was able to estimate that Dana had been dead for a few hours before police arrived and had most likely died during the night or early morning hours of that day. Dana was probably dead by 7:30 a.m. because she had not shown up for work. Following the conclusion that Dana was murdered between 1 and 7:30 in the morning, the investigation probed further into her life in an effort to identify potential suspects. Dana was the mother of 8-year-old triplets who lived with their father, Steve, her spouse. The police learned that she had recently separated from him at the time of her death. There were more possible suspects among those Dana might have invited into her home because she had begun a new life and made new friends. The people Dana worked for as a nanny mentioned a man named Adam who started stalking her, so detectives contacted her employers to find out if any of the people she was dating had disturbed her. Adam, a cable company employee, was working at Dana's house after she recently moved. He asked Dana out on a date after finishing the work. He kept trying to spend the evening with her, but she refused. Adam refused to accept no from her, and his actions eventually started to terrify Dana. She mentioned gifts, flowers, and notes left on the door, as well as incessant messages from him that didn't stop. These behaviors suggested obsessive, domineering, and irate behavior that might make Adam think about committing a crime. Police discovered that Dana had threatened to hold Adam accountable if she were to suffer any harm. Adam became the main suspect and was in the spotlight. Despite everything, his actions and potential motivation appeared to be strong evidence of guilt. Adam denied any role in Dana's demise. The police conducted a thorough investigation of his surroundings while he was being questioned. They looked through his work locker and his car, but they didn't find anything unusual. When questioned about his whereabouts, Adam acted aggressively and insisted on his innocence. Adam stated that he stayed at home with friends the night of the murder. His statements were verified by a review of his phone records. As a result, he was placed lower on the investigation's list of suspects, forcing the police to focus on other individuals. A phone number written fluently in pen on Dana's hand was the tiny but crucial piece of evidence that investigators concentrated on. They looked up the number and found that it belonged to Julian, a 35-year-old man. The importance of the phone number to Dana was evident from the fact that it was written in pen on her hand. To learn why Julian's number was inscribed on Dana's hand, detectives located him and asked him to come in for interrogation. Their suspicions were aroused by his unwillingness to provide a cogent response, which led them to investigate his relationship with Dana further. Julian acknowledged under duress that he was close to Dana, despite the fact that she was seeing his best friend Matt. Detectives started to question whether Julian could have been the murderer after this discovery, but when his alibi was examined, it was discovered that witnesses and establishment employees had verified that he was at the bar from 10:30 p.m. to 1 a.m. on the night of the murder. Julian was thus disqualified as the murderer by his alibi. The detectives began to question whether Matt could have committed the crime after discovering that Dana was having an affair with his friend. Romantic relationships have the power to arouse our emotions, and although it may not be immediately apparent to everyone, out-of-control feelings are frequently the root cause of such crimes. Personal intimacy is frequently the cause of crimes of this kind. Matt, Dana's romantic partner, was immediately elevated to the level of suspicion as a result. Investigators examined Dana and Matt's relationship more thoroughly after receiving Julian's information. The asymmetry of feelings was clear. Dana believed she had allowed Matt into her life, but Matt was blazing with passion for her. Lacked such intense emotion. According to phone records, Dana and Matt were in constant contact the night of the murder, with calls taking place between 11:30 p.m. and midnight. As a biker who abused illegal substances and was able to confront multiple men at once, Matt was described by Dana's friends as being abrasive and rude, all of which made him an obvious suspect. Investigators found that Matt lived close to Vancouver, Canada. While looking into Dana Laskowski, however, this did not absolve him of suspicion. In a couple of hours, he could have driven from his house to Dana's. When asked, Matt claimed that he was not involved in the crime because he had intended to meet Dana but was stopped at the border due to issues with his documents. His alibi was confirmed. Investigators asked Matt for any information that could help solve Dana's murder after he was exonerated of any suspicion. According to Matt, he had called Dana the night of the murder and observed that she appeared uneasy during their chat, which may indicate that someone was present in the house with her. Matt surmised that the unidentified individual might have been Steve, Dana's ex-husband. Dana had spent a portion of her life with Steve, so it was obvious that she needed to talk to him. Her triplets were his children. Breaking up is a tough experience, and depending on the situation, it can cause anger that can turn into murder. Maybe Steve decided to commit a crime because he was so furious after Dana left him. He might have committed murder out of passion, jealousy, or rage, all of which needed to be taken into account. When investigators started looking into Steve's identity, they discovered that he had given Dana a life insurance policy, which expanded the pool of potential explanations for what transpired to include financial ones. When Steve was brought to the police station to be questioned about his relationship with Dana, he seemed unusually distant and withdrawn, seen in his feelings. His emotions seemed to have been smothered. Another suspicious detail was discovered by the detectives during the interview. Steve's knees were abrasive, just like Dana's elbows and knees. Investigators thought that on the night of the murder, there might have been a disagreement between the two. Steve explained that he had sustained the abrasions on his knees while playing baseball when detectives questioned him about them, but according to one of the detectives there, who was a real baseball expert, those kinds of injuries were not typical of the sport. Steve was even more anxious after that, but did he have a chance to murder Dana? Steve responded that he was at home, 5 hours away from Puyallup, when asked where he was on the night of the murder. The following morning, he said, he put the children to bed, filled up the gas tank, and drove to a nearby campground. His explanation was intriguing. The triplets' absence from Dana's home the night she passed away could have been a coincidence, but it could also indicate that Steve had prearranged the entire situation. It took 10 hours to travel back and forth between Steve's and Dana's homes. If Steve had gone to Dana's house, investigators realized, he would undoubtedly need to stop at a gas station, so they gave careful thought to the possibility that he could have put the kids to bed, driven to Puyallup, committed the crime, and driven back. They looked into locations where he might have refilled up with gas and went back his potential path. Investigators removed Steve as a suspect after reviewing surveillance footage and examining areas of the road where his car might have been spotted. They were unable to find any concrete proof that Steve had made the trip. The investigation hit an impenetrable wall after all suspects were ruled out, which caused great frustration. The fact that Dana's body was covered in blankets seemed particularly strange, a behavior that amply demonstrated the unusual nature of the perpetrator. The investigators had reached a point where they had no viable suspect or explanation for the nature of the crime. In light of this, the police made the decision to enlist the FBI in the inquiry. Because the local police lacked the requisite experience to identify such specific signs, the investigators sought the FBI specialist's assistance in creating a psychological profile of the potential offender. After carefully examining the case, the FBI concluded that the crime was likely committed impulsively and in a fit of rage, revealing a disordered personality. The person who was in Dana's home that fateful night, according to experts, had no intention of killing her. They probably knew one another, spoke, and then he attacked in a fit of rage. The search had to be expanded after the police had already looked at the ex-husband, the boyfriend, and even the stalker. This crime was committed by someone. It was unclear who made the decision to expand the search for suspects in the Dana Laskowski case in light of fresh FBI information. Police were now searching for someone who could have lost control if provoked. Detectives examined the video footage from Dana's funeral in an effort to find fresh evidence. Finding out who was there and how people acted on this day of mourning was essential. It was crucial to observe who attended Dana's funeral and who did not, both from a psychological perspective. Given that most murders are carried out by someone the victim knew, it is possible that the murderer was one of these individuals. It's possible that the murderer attended the funeral because it would have been suspicious to skip it. However, how did he respond to that circumstance? Did anything have the potential to reveal him? The police discovered an entry in the guest book that caught them off guard. His loved ones wrote that they missed Dana and were shocked by her passing, expressing their sorrow over the loss. However, Amanda, Dana's niece's entry was especially noteworthy. "I apologize for not being the best niece," she wrote. "It's been 34 days since I broke free from addiction. You are the reason for this." Amanda was characterized by some family members as a wild and erratic young lady. According to what was written, Amanda had overcome her addiction following Dana's passing. She also did it for Dana's benefit, which said two crucial things. Her love for her aunt was the primary factor, but it also revealed that she felt bad about her death for whatever reason, which was important because it raised the possibility that she was involved in Dana's demise. Dana was a compassionate, kind individual. Dana loved her family, and in an effort to keep her niece, Amanda 17, out of trouble, she would often let her stay with her. Amanda was a frequent runaway from home. Because Amanda was a reliable adult who was always there to support them through any problems at home, Amanda and her friends would frequently visit Dana's house. The detectives looked at Amanda to talk about the circumstances surrounding her aunt's death. They had scheduled a meeting with her. Amanda disclosed that she and Dana had been like mother and daughter. She and her friends had always had the support of their aunt. They were teenagers with unstable home lives who spent time in the park and associated illegal substances and alcohol with their future. All of them had just finished high school, but they had no clear plans for the future. Dana was attempting to establish a secure location that Amanda and her friends could visit day or night. As a result, when investigators questioned Amanda about Dana's murder, the back door of her home was always left open at night. She gave a list of those who had visited the house, naming Zane in particular. "He was a strong man with a violent temper," she said. Then Amanda revealed something even more unsettling. She described how she had once been beaten by Zane. He threw her on the couch and started acting aggressively. He would try to hit on her hard and she would push him away and ask him why. Zane merely chuckled at this, displaying his strength and beauty, as though he was taking pleasure in the situation. The detectives made the decision to examine Zane more closely and search the databases. Zane was a suspect due to his criminal history of fighting and dealing illegal substances. To find out more about Zane, one of the detectives got in touch with his young informant. In their meeting, he talked about Dana's murder and recommended Zane as a potential suspect. But according to the informant, Zane was not the one who killed Dana. Emily, a young woman from Amanda's group, was the murderer. Emily Lauenborg, a 17-year-old drug user, lived close to Dana's home. Emily and Amanda had a close relationship. They might have even been best friends. After hearing the story, the detective started to question its authenticity. He couldn't believe that Emily, a 5'2" girl who was frail, could strangle a 36-year-old mother of 3. The informant responded that she was no longer the frail girl she had been. She had matured and gained muscle. Because she enjoyed wrestling men, she was known as the mutant. Emily wasn't your usual suspect, but as the investigation progressed, it became clear that she was the strongest of the problematic teenagers, impressing everyone, including the guys, with her physical prowess and wanting arm wrestling and even regular wrestling. Emily was taken to the station by the detectives to be questioned about her potential role in Dana's murder. After placing her hands on the table, Emily threw back her head and frantically looked from side to side before leaning forward and angrily telling her that she had been slandered. Emily was asked by the police where she was when Dana was killed. Emily and Amanda both stated that they were present at the party when the crime was committed. But around midnight, Amanda and Emily left the party, and the police were able to track them down. Consequently, they could have arrived at Dana's residence by 1 in the morning. Everything suggested that they were concealing something and were most likely involved in the crime. However, what had actually occurred? Was Emily responsible for the murder? The police were able to secure a search warrant for Emily's rented room because of mounting circumstantial evidence against her. Her private journal was one of the things confiscated. It had the usual entries of a 17-year-old girl, but it quickly disclosed surprising information. A wish list that included the desire to murder someone and escape punishment was one of the entries. Emily expresses her anger towards Amanda in a different entry, stating that she wants to strangle Amanda in the same manner that she strangled her aunt. Emily's guilt was confirmed by this startling discovery. The murder, Dana's strangling, and the intention to potentially strangle Amanda in a similar way were all described in the diaries. Crucially, detectives had not yet made public the news that Dana had strangled to death when they discovered Emily's diary. This further suggested that Emily was to blame for Dana's ordeal. Amanda was questioned by detectives once more and was accused of lying about the night her aunt was killed. They questioned why she had deceived everyone. After all, Emily stated that she wanted money and that she wasn't there under duress. Amanda couldn't stand it any longer and told the detectives everything she knew before they even got to Dana's house. Dana woke up as they walked into the living room and heard a noise. The sight of them startled her. Dana responded that she didn't have any money when they told her they needed it. Emily, however, was not happy with that response and asked Dana for money once more. Emily was gently nudged in the direction of the exit when Dana asked them to leave. Emily didn't like it though, and she wasn't going to put up with it. In front of Amanda, she launched an attack on Dana and strangled her. Emily refused to listen to Amanda's cries for her to stop. The fact that Amanda did nothing but watch Emily kill her aunt suggests that she either feared Emily or that it happened so fast that she was likely unaware of what she was seeing. Amanda's scream, not Dana's, was heard by a neighbor at 1 a.m. when Dana was killed. Emily covered Dana's body with a blanket and placed it on the couch. Before they left, they took what little money Dana had. Emily took a brief break to get a black shirt out of Dana's closet. Emily wore that exact shirt when she attended Dana's funeral. It was her display of power and authority. Motive was the question that the investigators were struggling with. Emily had expressed her anger to her friends about Amanda's constant abandonment of her for her aunt. Given their close relationship, Emily might have killed Dana in order to fully control Amanda. However, Amanda was given a plea deal and would not be imprisoned for her involvement in Dana's murder. After much deliberation, investigators decided that Amanda was needed as a witness because she had witnessed the murder and would have the right to remain silent if she were charged with a crime. As a result, Amanda became a witness and gave information about what transpired that fateful night. It was the vital data that the authorities required. However, because of Emily's unremarkable size, prosecutors were unsure they could convince a jury of her guilt and allowed her to enter a guilty plea to the lesser charge of manslaughter. After being convicted and serving 5.5 years in prison, Emily Lollenborg was released in 2008. She later moved back to Puyallup, changed her name, got married, and had kids. Locals will undoubtedly be concerned about Emily's freedom to roam the streets. Like serial killers who wear mementos of their crimes, she was dressed in the victim's clothing, having already killed once and never regretting it at the funeral. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Jasmine Block, a 15-year-old from Alexandria, Minnesota, had 1 month until the start of the new school year on August 8, 2017. She was having a great time boating with her friends during her summer vacation, but by nightfall, Jasmine was suffering from a headache. Sarah, her mother, suggested that she take it easy and wait for the pain to subside. Jasmine laid down after taking her mother's advice. Sarah had to leave for an urgent family matter at 10:30 p.m. Before leaving the house, she made sure Jasmine was okay and would attempt to get some sleep. Knowing that Jasmine's older sister and her boyfriend were at home gave her comfort. 3 hours later, Sarah found her younger daughter gone when she got home. To her surprise, the top portion of the pajamas she was sleeping in was on the floor, and Jasmine's phone, keys, and bag were all at home. She had also lost 2 pairs of shoes. At first, Jasmine's family thought she had just gone outside to get some fresh air in the hopes that her headache would go away, because she had never left a note before. She wasn't in the house, though. Because her daughter was terrified of the dark, Sarah was certain that she wouldn't flee, especially at night. This indicated that she had been abducted. Sarah became so worried that she called the police. Hundreds of locals and the police joined the search for the missing teen in the days that followed. Posters asking anyone who saw Jasmine to report her whereabouts were displayed everywhere. The young girl found herself in the worst nightmare imaginable as the hunt for Jasmine went on. A family friend named Thomas Barker visited them that evening on August 8th while she was trying to fall asleep despite having a headache. Since she was a young child, Jasmine has known Thomas Barker, the 32-year-old father of her best friend. The youngest of his 6 children was born only a month ago, and he was married. Jasmine believed him when he told her that his son was having a breakdown of some kind, and that he couldn't manage it alone. In an attempt to soothe his son, Thomas asked if she could accompany him to their house. Even though it was late, Jasmine was unable to turn down his request, but she had a hazy feeling of danger during the ride. Her instinct was correct. The story about his son's breakdown was really a pretext. Rather, Barker drove Jasmine 16 kilometers from her home to a remote mobile home in the neighboring town of Carlos. Barker attacked her out of the blue and used zip ties to bind her hands and feet. Jasmine's actual nightmare started inside the mobile home. Before attacking her, Barker threatened her with his gun. Once his craving was satiated, Barker told his victim why he had taken her hostage. He brought up the incident a few days prior when Jasmine fell while riding a bicycle with his son. She revealed a bruise on her body by slightly lifting her shirt. For Thomas, it was an innocent incident. The 32-year-old man's inappropriate thoughts were triggered by it, which ultimately led him to abduct her. Barker and Jasmine stayed in the mobile home for the next few days. After 3 days, Thomas's old friend Joshua Holby, 31, and his acquaintance Stephen Powers, 20, arrived at the house, decreasing Jasmine's chances of escaping. Jasmine was mistreated by all 3 men, but Stephen in particular was not ashamed to participate in the abuse. Although Joshua didn't try to hurt her, he also didn't try to free her or call the police. Jasmine was kept in a utility room most of the time and made an effort to keep quiet out of concern that they would hurt her or worse. At intervals, they fed her fast food and water, and all 3 of them tried to kill her several times. Barker tried to kill Jasmine twice in the 13 days she was left alone with him. His initial attempt to drown his captive was unsuccessful because Jasmine resisted and fought valiantly to save her life. On his second try, he came up with a darker scheme. He put her in a bag with the intention of drowning her in the bathtub. However, Jasmine was able to chew a hole in the bag, insert her fingers, then her hand, and eventually free herself when he left her in the bedroom to fill the tub. When Barker realized she was out of the bag, he became furious and hit her. He briefly gave up on trying to get rid of her, but he later went back to his evil schemes with the help of his cronies. Stephen helped Barker attempt to drown Jasmine on the 3rd attempt. He taped a sock shut after jamming it into her mouth, but despite both men's best efforts, the young girl was fighting for her life with great vigor and they were unable to overcome her. Joshua, the heaviest of the kidnappers, sat on top of Jasmine after the criminals realized that drowning her would not work and sandwiched her between 2 halves of a sofa bed with a pillow over her head. They had a very clear idea. They wanted Jasmine to choke, but she persisted in struggling, kicking, and fighting, so this plan also failed. Jasmine's 5th and last attempt on her life took an odd turn. Threatening her with a knife, the men made her stand on a number of stacked buckets, tied a noose around her neck, and fastened a rope to the ceiling. However, Thomas told Joshua to untie the noose because she might die after he unintentionally knocked over the buckets, causing them to roll on the floor. Evidently, the men found it difficult to cross the boundary of taking a life, even after all their efforts to get rid of Jasmine. Thomas later told Jasmine, dejectedly, that he was only doing this to avoid being caught with her because he was afraid of going to jail. The mobile home's door was unexpectedly knocked on almost a month after Jasmine was kidnapped. A policeman was circulating the neighborhood to ask about a theft that had nothing to do with the kidnapping. The policeman left after the 3 suspects, who were all inside the house at the time, declined to answer the knock. The criminals realized they needed to find another hiding place immediately following the officer's visit. After placing Jasmine in a sports bag and escorting her into their vehicle, they let her exit the bag. In an attempt to find a new place to hide the girl, they first went to a number of cornfields before setting up camp at an abandoned house in Grant County. Jasmine feared for her life at the hands of Barker and his cronies, and by this time she was certain that they had no intention of letting her go alive. But good fortune was on the girl's side. She had an opportunity because of the kidnappers' negligence and the forced relocation to a new location. The previous day, the men had come across a police vehicle while driving and quickly threw some illegal substances out the window. They made the decision to look for those substances at the new location and had to purchase supplies for both themselves and their captive. They left Jasmine sitting in another car, thinking she wouldn't go anywhere, and told her they would be gone for approximately an hour. Thus, Jasmine was alone for the first time in 29 days following her kidnapping. After waiting for approximately 5 minutes after Thomas's car had driven away, she plucked up the courage to get out and hurriedly jumped out. In the hopes of finding assistance, she hurried to the 2 closest homes, but they appeared to be deserted. She didn't even think twice before jumping into the water when she spotted a house across Thompson Lake. In order to swim more quickly, she removed her pajama pants and shoes. When she got to the opposite shore, she saw Thomas's car as she crossed a field and came out onto the road. Jasmine hurried to hide in the grass, keeping low and trying to control her labored breathing so she wouldn't be noticed. She was so relieved to discover that she had erred in putting someone she had never met before behind the wheel. Jasmine ran across the street and across the field to a house close by. On Tuesday afternoon, local farmer Earl Melcher was meant to be at work, but he had to go home because he had forgotten his tools. He saw something strange in the distance among the grass before he got into his pickup truck to return to work. He thought it might be a deer grazing his field from hundreds of meters away, but when he saw it was a girl, he turned on his car and headed in her direction. When Jasmine heard the car, she rushed to meet him. The man was astounded by what he saw when the girl arrived at Earl's pickup and opened the door. In a single breath, Jasmine exclaimed, "Call the police! I am Jasmine Block and I have been abducted." But Earl had already seen the girl's face on posters around town, so he knew who she was. For him, as a farmer and the father of 3 daughters, it was an incredible sensation. He turned on the car's heater, sat Jasmine down, and gave her a towel. He was going to take her to the hospital when he called 911, but the emergency dispatcher advised him to wait for the police. When the police got there, they saw an absolutely unbelievable scene. Jasmine yelled, "There's that car," as Earl assisted her in getting into the sheriff's assistant's SUV. That car is there. Incredibly, Stephen Powers was just by their house at that precise moment. The suspect was immediately pursued by one of the officers, who jumped into his vehicle. Powers was taken into custody following a comparatively brief pursuit. Shortly thereafter, Joshua Holby and Thomas Barker were captured. Jasmine's family thanked the brave farmer who just so happened to be home on that fateful day in the days after she returned home. Earl received a reward of $7,000 from the police for helping to save the girl. "Thank you, Earl," said the police chief, praising his actions. "This world is a better place because of people like you." To which Earl replied respectfully, "Anyone could have called 911. I was in the right place at the right time by chance." Earl already knew what he was going to do with the reward money. He gave the money to Jasmine and her family and invited them to lunch. He clarified that, although the sum meant a lot to him, Jasmine's family needed it far more than he did. Their family and friends were shocked to learn that Thomas, Joshua, and Stephen were the ones who had abducted the girl, even though they had previous criminal records. According to Thomas's sister, she couldn't fathom how her brother, who has cerebral palsy and uses a walker, could have managed to kidnap a teenager. She added that she helped with the search for the girl, and that Barker's wife and mother even went to the house where he was keeping her, but they had no suspicions. Thomas Barker was given a 25-year prison sentence for his actions toward his son's friend a year after the kidnapping. He will spend the rest of his life listed as a violent offender. He can, however, apply for civil commitment after being released from prison, and, if accepted, he will live out the rest of his days in a specialized facility. Stephen Powers will spend 8.5 years, and Joshua Holby will spend 8 years behind bars. Even though the girl managed to get away, the 29 days that the 3 men held her captive had a profound effect on her. Never again will she be the same. Her words, "None of us will be." She has trouble sleeping because she fears nightmares, and every time she closes her eyes, she sees the faces of the kidnappers. Jasmine finds it difficult to trust people these days, so she withdraws from them. Fortunately, acknowledged Sarah, her mother, the world is not without kind people. Jasmine had the chance to visit a post-traumatic stress disorder specialist in Texas to try out novel therapeutic approaches. She brought 2 gadgets home from the meeting that have been effectively assisting her in managing her PTSD symptoms, anxiety, and nightmares. In addition to these resources, Jasmine says she has found comfort in talking to friends and creating art as a way to express herself. She is getting better every day. In order to support other girls who might have gone through something similar, she made the decision to share her story. Jasmine smiles and responds that she just wants everyone to know that she is doing well when asked if she has anything else to share. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Susan Walters, formerly known as Susan Kuhnhausen, was employed at Portland Hospital in Oregon's Critical Care and Resuscitation Unit on September 1, 2006. Before going home after her sixth-floor shift, she made the decision to visit a beauty parlor to get a new hairstyle and unwind after a demanding day. She felt revitalized and renewed when she left the salon. Maybe she thought of the proverb that says, "A woman is about to change her life when she changes her hairstyle." Susan had no idea how accurate this statement would prove to be. She came upon a one-story blue Cape Cod-style home with a gray fence around it. She went through the back door and discovered a note from her husband, Mike, in the hallway by the microwave. He said he had gone to the beach and had to leave. They would meet up on Friday or Saturday, he added. Susan heard the security system and unlocked the kitchen door. After deactivating it by entering the code, she proceeded to the front door and emerged into the front yard. Susan gave herself a minute or two to check the mail outside on this warm, clear September evening. When she finally removed her shoes and went back inside, she saw that the bedroom was unusually dark. She always drew back the curtains in the morning, so this was out of the ordinary. But she brushed it off, assuming she had been rushing and had forgotten, and moved on into the room. Out of nowhere, a man emerged from behind the bedroom door. He was a huge giant that suddenly materialized, standing 180 centimeters tall and weighing about 90 kilograms. He had on a baseball cap pulled down over his eyes and a striped shirt. His long gray hair was pulled back into a ponytail that was concealed beneath the cap, and the rest of his face was entirely covered by a gray beard and mustache that made him appear even more menacing. Susan was most horrified to see that he was wearing yellow rubber gloves and that he had a hammer in one of them. Most people would instinctively run away if they saw a stranger in their bedroom wielding a hammer, but Susan could not be considered a normal individual. She was 51 years old and had spent 30 years working as a nurse in the critical care and intensive care units, so she understood how difficult it was. She had subdued patients who had taken illegal substances, dealt with wounded men who were writhing in agony, and learned how to deal with any of those situations while maintaining composure. She routinely received self-defense training, just like other hospital nurses. They knew how to escape a grip or sidestep a blow. Susan had gained self-confidence through years of training, so she didn't flee when the stranger tried to hit her with the hammer. Rather, she sprang at him. She was aware that if she got close, the hammer's swing would be much weaker. One blow to her temple, however, proved to be very painful. "Who are you? What do you want?" she yelled as loudly as she could, overcoming the pain. But he didn't stop or respond. Susan's knees ached from multiple surgeries, and she was significantly shorter than the man at 164 centimeters, but she weighed more than the stranger. Susan threw her body at him, hoping to take advantage of this. He pushed her back against the wall, but he didn't fall. Then he said the one and only thing he would say that night: "You are strong." Susan felt her body tingle with adrenaline. She suddenly understood that the stranger had come to her house to murder her rather than rob her. His intentions were obvious, and she wasn't going to wait for it to happen, even though she didn't know why or who he was. For the second time, Susan shoved him. She yelled, "Who sent you?" once more. The only answer was silence. Luckily, the woman was able to knock the hammer out of his hand, and then hit him 3 or 4 times in the head. Susan caught him by the throat as he recovered control of the instrument. She interrupted his breathing with her hands and repeated, "Who sent you here?" The stranger's face first turned red, then purplish, and then nearly blue. In a panic, Susan released his throat. She just wanted to get out of there because she was tired and in pain. However, the man caught up to her before she could escape the bedroom and enter the small hallway. Her lip was smashed when he pushed and struck her. Even now, she is plagued by the memory of what transpired next. Susan looked down at the floor and thought she was going to die as he stood over her with the hammer. However, people needed to know that she battled for her life if death was her destiny. She was unable to describe how she did it, but she was able to knock the man down on the floor beside her and began biting him so that, should she die, her killer would be identified by her tooth marks. She rolled with the man on the floor, biting his hand, his thigh, and even ripping his pants zipper to get to his groin. For her, though, even that was insufficient. She felt the man's clothes with her hand in an attempt to find any identification or proof that she could conceal in a closet or beneath the bed for the police to find. For a full 14 minutes, the struggle went on. "Tell me who sent you here and I'll call an ambulance for you," she yelled as she threw her left leg over the intruder, climbed on top and put her left arm around his neck. He remained silent. Rather than letting her off his back, the intruder just growled. Susan pressed her hand more firmly against his throat as she leaned in. The man eventually ceased to move. Susan ran to the neighbor's house, grabbed his hammer, and dialed 911. When Susan's neighbor told the emergency dispatcher that the injured woman may have strangled an unidentified intruder who had broken into her home with the intention of killing her, the dispatcher was shocked. The neighbor clarified that Susan had put the man in a chokehold and repeatedly hit him with a hammer after the operator explained what the injured woman had done. The neighbor, who works as a nurse herself, responded that the man needed the ambulance when asked if the injured woman needed one. The dispatcher reassured the women that the ambulance was already en route and asked them to stop handling the hammer. Susan was taken to the hospital where she worked by the paramedics who arrived. Her worst fears were validated at that point. The man who had attacked her was dead, she found out. The identity of the man was quickly established by investigators. In his back pocket, they discovered an identification card. The police had been keeping an eye on Ed Haffey, a 59-year-old Viet. While Susan was being treated, she began to reflect on her life and try to figure out who could have wanted her dead. Susan had a difficult upbringing. Despite their love for her, her parents were unable to provide personal examples of what a successful marriage looked like. Their lives were very hectic because her father was an Air Force chef and her mother was a stay-at-home mom. The family had to constantly adjust to new homes and schools after moving from Colorado to Arizona, California, and Nevada. When Susan was in the second grade, her parents got divorced. Susan's romantic life took a turn in the early 1980 when she moved to Oregon and began working as a nurse. Susan's mother and friend sponsored a newspaper ad in 1988, announcing that she was prepared for a committed relationship. The ad was written in Susan's usual lighthearted and upbeat style. Mike Kuhnhausen, 39, wrote that he loved nothing more than strolling along the beach at sunset in one of the many responses she received. Mike spent a lot of time talking on the phone. He spoke in a pleasant tone and didn't hesitate to bring up weighty subjects. They threw unsalted peanuts to squirrels and fed ducks on their first date in February 1988 at the Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden. They were married within a year. However, things weren't always easy in their marriage. The days of taking long walks in the park were over. Although Susan was the primary provider for the family, her husband disapproved of her spending time with friends and insisted on an accounting for every dollar spent. Susan soon discovered that her husband had never been content and didn't think he could make her happy, and they didn't have any kids. Mike eventually got a job at a business that sold adult videos at one of its locations. However, Susan decided she had had enough after 17 years of marriage. Although she no longer wanted to live with her husband, she still cared for him. She desired to experience joy once more. She asked him to leave the house in September 2005. Mike went to live with his father. That being said, they remained friendly, and he frequently came over to visit Susan's cats. As a result, Susan made the grave error of failing to update the locks or the alarm code, which was 1,210 the day of their wedding. Susan went home to collect her belongings the very next day following the attack, accompanied by her friend Helen Ballone. A backpack that shouldn't have been in the basement was discovered by Helen. Like any other basement, Susan's was filled with a wide range of items, so the police were unaware of the backpack. Dessert syrup, diabetes medicine, $200 in cash, a journal, and a receipt for a payment made to Ed Haffey were all found inside the backpack. The diary entry, from September 4, 2006, states that Mike was supposed to get a call from the man. Mike's new mobile number was also included. According to the autopsy, Haffey had taken a nearly fatal amount of illegal drugs prior to breaking into Susan's home. Although his family told the police that he was a successful tennis player and came from a wealthy family, the man had recently been living in a trailer. But 15 years ago, Haffey did something horrible. He planned the murder of Georgia Lee Dutton, 39, his ex-girlfriend, in 1991 near Roseburg, in the Umpqua River. Her body was discovered. After acknowledging his guilt, Haffey was imprisoned for the next 9 years. He relocated to Portland after being released in November 2003, where he naturally began looking for work. When Mike Kuhnhausen hired him to clean the floors of an adult video store in July 2004, he discovered it. The police learned that Mike had traveled to the coast and stayed at the Lincoln City Inn on the day of Susan's attack. He went back to Portland during the night and bought a Taurus .357 Magnum revolver from a pawn shop the next day. Mike ran away after leaving a parting note at his father's home on September 8 that read, "All I wanted was to be loved, and every time I achieved that, I ruined everything." His arrest warrant was issued by the police. He was arrested on September 13 in the Kaiser Sunnyside Medical Center parking lot, where Mike said he planned to go to the psychiatric clinic for assistance. He expressed to the officers his sense of meaninglessness in life. His claims of innocence were not taken seriously by the police. Mike Kuhnhausen had lost his job a few weeks earlier and was living on the streets. Mike knew that Susan had named her brother as the beneficiary of her insurance policy in case she passed away. But Mike and Susan had paid off the $300,000 mortgage on their home, and if Susan passed away, it would still belong to him. Mike first claimed he didn't even know Haffey, but the detectives had already gotten company records to support their claim. Mike acknowledged that he was acquainted with Ed Haffey, but that did not imply that he had done anything wrong. Other evidence, however, surfaced that suggested the two men were conspiring. Records from the security system indicated that someone had turned off the alarm while Susan was at work, but there were no indications of forced entry into the house. Mike denied allowing Haffey to enter the house, but he did say he had turned it off when he left the note. However, Haffey's former accomplice called the police on September 18 to report that Haffey had asked him to participate in an insurance fraud scheme. He described how he and Haffey met with the town's contractor, Mike Kuhnhausen, who offered the man $5,000 in exchange for helping Haffey murder his wife. Naturally, the man declined. Another witness reported to the police on November 17 that he had escorted Haffey to a parking lot where he met a bald man. After the assault on Susan, he saw the man's picture on the news a few days later. Mike Kuhnhausen was the one. Despite Mike's best efforts to deny it, the evidence against him was growing, and on August 30, 2007, he admitted to ordering the murder of his wife. "You wanted me to share a life with you until death do us part. Turns out, you were hoping the sooner it happened the better. If I believed you deserved to die, I would have had the courage to do it myself," Susan said on the stand during the trial. Mike was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Susan filed a lawsuit for $1 million right after the sentencing to make sure he wouldn't have enough money left for another contract. The scheduled date of Mike's release was September 14, 2014. His former spouse was prepared for it. The new Susan, who had once been lively and daring, became very wary. She sat with her back to the door in restaurants. She started taking a different route to work, and she would circle the block for a while if she thought someone might be pursuing her in an attempt to ward them off. In Portland, she relocated to a new home on a gravel-lined dead-end street where she could hear footsteps if someone came to the window or door. She also practiced shooting in the garage next door. "I'm serving a life sentence for choosing the wrong husband," she quipped. Susan did everything she could to make sure Mike would never be able to harm her, but her ex-husband was never given the opportunity. 92 days prior to his release, he passed away from cancer on Friday, June 13, 2014. The prisoner's letters reveal that he only confessed to the crime in order to avoid a longer sentence and never really admitted his guilt. Mike thought he was the true victim of the incident. Susan acknowledges that she mourns his life, which he could have had if he had only let those who loved him into his heart. rather than his departure. She also laments that he passed away in prison, far from all of his loved ones. Since it is difficult for a victim of crime to get the information they need, Susan looked for information about Mike's release and her rights following his release while he was incarcerated. As a result, in 2017, she and the district attorney's office developed Case Companion, a free website devoted to helping local crime victims. It provides answers to all of the victims' inquiries concerning the legal system. Victims can also follow the defendant's court dates, sentencing information, and the date of the convicted person's release after the district attorney's office files charges. Susan kept up her nursing career until December 2014. Since saving lives was the focus of her work, she was long perplexed as to why her coworkers referred to her as a hero. They called her a hero not because she killed someone, but because they want to believe that if they were in a similar situation, they would also be able to survive, her supervisor explained to her. Susan can't recall what happened without crying, even after all these years. She acknowledges that she thought of Hafey's family right away after learning of his passing. Everyone has someone who loves them. Children, a wife, a mother, a father. The worst part of what happened is not that someone tried to kill me, but that I had to kill someone to survive. But I'm not ashamed because I didn't choose his death. I chose my life. I chose to live. Although what happened was terrible, no one in this family thinks poorly of you. You did what you had to do, and by doing so you protected many from a similar fate. Susan finds comfort in helping others, knowing that they can also survive after an attack. Aunt Ada Duffy wrote her a letter in 2010 after learning about her suffering. If you can't run and can't hide, you have to fight, she states. You can't know that you won't survive. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Many people can get to the point where they suspect a loved one of betraying them. Others may give in to the influence of fantasies of retaliation against the betrayer, while others may decide to end the relationship due to such suspicions. However, what if a katana were to make these fantasies come true? The setting for this story was Camas, Washington, in 2018. The topic of discussion was a woman who lived in a nice home in a quiet neighborhood. Alex Lovell was the man's name. For 29-year-old Alex, playing video games was his main passion. He was in front of the computer for about 12 or 13 hours every day. Alex took his pastimes so seriously that he routinely performed shoulder, wrist, and hand exercises. He even worked on a unique mouse control method to improve his efficiency as a gamer or player. At the age of 30, Alex's girlfriend Emily Javier was not pleased with his obsession. After 2 years of dating, the young couple noticed that Alex was spending more and more time playing games and having less time for her. Emily, of course, did not like this situation. When Alex made the decision to pursue a career in professional gaming, her patience reached a breaking point. Emily struggled to accept a gaming rival, even though she was somewhat comfortable sharing her boyfriend's gaming habits. When she found the Tinder dating app on Alex's phone, her resentment reached new heights. She became very suspicious of this. She therefore realized that Alex had found another girl when she saw red hairs in the shower and scratches on his back, even though her hair was then dyed green. Convinced that he would simply deny everything, Emily started to plot a retaliation that would enable her to permanently get rid of him, rather than confronting him head-on. She considered purchasing poison, getting a gun, or hiring a killer. No, she purchased a katana at a shopping center. That was the only thing she could think of right now, driven by anger. She therefore made the decision to give herself an additional week to polish her strategy. She entered the question, how to kill someone with a sword, into a search engine while she was at home with the katana. Not surprisingly, her question was answered in a rather direct manner. In order to start their last journey to the Hawaiian Islands with Alex, the girl bought plane tickets at the same time. She confessed that she was tired of life in 2 notes, one to her mother and the other to a close friend. She also wrote Alex a note, though it's unclear what it said and when he was meant to read it. At first, it seemed as though she wanted to do something to herself while on vacation. However, how did she intend to exact revenge on Alex? kill him too? It's feasible, particularly considering that she could have brought the sword with her if she had checked it in with her bags rather than bringing it on her person. One evening, though, Alex came home at about 9. He wanted to go to bed and hardly gave his girlfriend any attention. Emily became emotionally unstable as a result of this. She taped 2 additional knives to her side of the bed in case her sword plan didn't work, and she concealed the katana there because she felt she could no longer stand such treatment. She went back to her boyfriend after completing her preparations and offered him a drink to help him fall asleep more quickly while intoxicated. Emily hid the man's phone, which he would need to call for assistance after he fell asleep quickly. She illuminated his neck with the light from her own phone so she could see better and aim more precisely. Her hand went to the katana, but just as she was about to attack, she unintentionally struck Alex in the head with the katana's back, waking him up. An adrenaline rush helped Alex quickly regain his sense of direction and start using his hands and feet to block Emily's next blows. At last, he was able to hold her tightly. He exclaimed in his final moments that he loved her and was shocked that she was attempting to murder him. Alex was on the verge of fainting and begged her to call for assistance or he would perish. Emily, oddly enough, listened. A dispatcher received a call from a girl who was hysterical at 1:54 a.m. on March 3rd. She was yelling that her boyfriend had been hurt. When she inquired as to where the girl had hurt her boyfriend, Emily exclaimed, "Everywhere! Everywhere!" The dispatcher wanted to know where the knife was. The girl responded, shocked, that she had used a samurai sword to attack her boyfriend. The dispatcher advised her to bandage her boyfriend's wounds and asked her to go back to the bedroom where he was to see if he was still breathing. Emily, however, insisted that she couldn't go there because there was too much blood. She snapped back to reality and saw that her boyfriend was actually dying. She even considered the possibility that he was already dead. Officers soon showed up on the scene. Alex was curled up, covered in blood when they entered the bedroom. He had deep gashes on the left side of his head, neck, and torso, among other potentially fatal injuries. Emily had nearly severed 3 fingers on his hand, cut his legs, and broken his wrist. Emily was taken into custody without protest and with tears in her eyes. While Alex was taken to the hospital, she let the legal system take care of her. A $350,000 bail was set for her. Alex's body had 26 wounds, according to the doctors. 6 major surgeries were required for him. 45 of the 150 staples they applied to him were on his head alone. However, the medical staff miraculously succeeded in reattaching his fingers. He would undoubtedly need to see a physical therapist for a while, but the fact that he lived was more significant. Because of Emily's weapon choice, the ferocity with which she executed the attack, and Alex's incredible fortitude, this attack garnered a lot of attention in the US and made headlines in numerous media outlets. Even though he had a long recovery ahead of him, he maintained an exceptionally optimistic outlook. He amusingly posted a question on the internet a day after the attack, asking if anyone could split a picture of him and Emily together. Some of his remarks were repeated by the media, though it's unclear how he was able to take the attack so lightly. One example would be, "I'm really proud that I was beaten with a sword and by a girl, man. I must sacrifice it for her. I certainly took a lesson from this. There's no comparing the feeling of when I overpowered her," he continues. "I've participated in sports, taken first place in major competitions, and more. I've performed snowboard tricks. This is superior. I believed it was right to defeat someone who was determined to do me harm. I had spent my entire life anticipating this." Alex credits his love of kung fu movies and his habit of competing against other gamers with helping him win. He says he never cheated on Emily, but acknowledges that he likely spent too much time in front of the monitor. He remarked, "I hardly had time for one girl, much less another. He simply was too worn out to give her the affection she so richly deserved." Tinder was on his phone, he clarified, but he hadn't used it since it became apparent that he and Emily were seriously dating. Alex even acknowledged that the exhaustion from playing video games all day was the reason for his low libido. This might have persuaded Emily that he no longer wanted her, but he says that numerous times before, even when another girl merely liked his picture on social media, she had falsely accused him of cheating. All of this is denied by Emily. Regarding the red hairs, they might have come from his dog's fur or his own beard. Emily found it challenging to defend herself in court. Everyone could see that this was a carefully considered and planned crime. Emily told police that she wanted to kill him for cheating. That was my objective. She was convicted of attempting first-degree murder. Her sentence was lowered from a potential 20-year term to 19 years because of Alex's survival, her lack of prior convictions, and her own decision to call 911 for assistance. This result did not sit well with Alex's family. They felt that because she tried to kill their son, she should be punished more severely. Emily countered that because of her history of childhood trauma, which hindered her ability to form relationships, her sentence should be shortened. Although her psychologist acknowledged that she had PTSD, he said it had no bearing on the case. The judge ultimately decided that she should receive almost the maximum sentence because of the severity of the attack. She must also receive treatment for her aggression and mental health issues. She must pay $30,000 in reparations and is forbidden from getting in touch with Alex or his family. To help Alex recover, his gaming friends set up a crowdfunding page and raised thousands of dollars. He is presently recuperating and has largely resumed his regular activities. He says he hasn't spoken to Emily since the attack. When asked how he feels about her, he admits that she saved his life by calling 911, which is significant. But it's difficult to sum up his feelings for his ex-girlfriend in just 2 words. In any case, he thinks she needs significant assistance. "I didn't expect this, but something like this had to happen," he continues in his characteristically lighthearted tone. "She reached for the samurai sword because she obviously didn't want me to end up in the wrong hands." And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. The only significant clue was a bite left by the attacker on the victim's body. It took the police over 20 years to discover the horrifying truth, but such a turn of events sparked outrage and criticism because no one expected such a result. Sherry Rasmussen was born on February 7, 1957 in the state of Washington. She grew up in a big, friendly family with 2 sisters and loving parents. They later moved to Tucson, Arizona, where Sherry attended the local school. Sherry was an excellent student who completed elementary school a year ahead of her peers. During her summer vacation, she completed the entire 7th grade program by herself. After graduating from high school in 1973, she enrolled at a California college where her older sister was already a first-year student. Sherry decided to pursue a medical education and become a nurse, which required her to complete additional courses at another institution. After graduating from college in 1975, Sherry decided to pursue a master's degree at the University of California, Los Angeles, where she also worked as a nurse to fund her education. She received her master's degree at the age of 23. Her father purchased an apartment in the Los Angeles suburbs for her, but Sherry refused to live on her parents' income, so she wrote her father a check every month for the full amount of the mortgage payments. She also got a job at a local hospital, where she led the nursing department that cared for seriously ill patients. In May 1984, Sherry met John Ruthin, a computer engineer with a good education and intelligence. They started dating and married a year later. John moved in to share their apartment. They spent their honeymoon in Jamaica and returned home to celebrate Christmas with Sherry's family. Closer to 10 a.m. John tried to reach her by phone, but she didn't answer. Half an hour later, he tried again, but still no answer, so he called her workplace to check if she had gone to work, but Sherry hadn't shown up at the hospital. Either her sister also tried to reach her, but without success. John returned home from work at around 6 p.m. and immediately noticed something strange. The garage door was open, even though he had closed it in the morning, and Sherry's car was missing. Therefore, he first thought that she had gone somewhere. As he approached the garage, he saw a lot of broken glass and immediately discovered its source. There was a small balcony above the garage with a glass door which had been smashed. He entered the house through the garage, and to his horror found Sherry there. She was lying on the floor, her body badly disfigured. John immediately called the police, and detectives began to examine the crime scene. In all the rooms there was complete chaos. Broken vases, overturned furniture, and scattered items. A bloody handprint was found on the wall next to the alarm button. Apparently, the victim tried to reach it but failed. In addition to extensive bruises and wounds, experts discovered a human bite mark on Sherry's wrist. Aside from all of the foregoing, the marks on her hands indicated that the attacker had tied the victim before releasing her. The death was caused by 3 close-range gunshot wounds. Detectives discovered a blanket with bullet holes in the apartment and concluded that the attacker had wrapped the gun in it to muffle the sound of the shots. Detectives immediately concluded that the attacker and Sherry had engaged in a prolonged struggle. This was demonstrated by the number of scattered and broken items throughout the apartment, as well as a bloody near the alarm button. The lead investigator quickly stated that they were dealing with a failed robbery. In his opinion, at least 2 criminals broke into Sherry's apartment, but they didn't expect her to be there. A struggle ensued between them, and Sherry fought for her life until the end. Several facts supported the robbery version, the first of which was the disappearance of Sherry's car from the garage. Second, someone had placed the stereo equipment and player near the staircase leading to the 2nd floor. According to police, the robbers intended to take them and leave, but after the scuffle and murder, they fled the scene. However, there were some questionable scenes in this version. First, the police found no evidence of forced entry, implying that either Sherry let the criminals in herself or they had a key. Second, the perpetrators did not touch all of the valuable items, including the jewelry box that was in plain sight. Detectives interviewed all of Sherry's neighbors but found no new leads. Residents reported hearing a struggle but no gunshots, and no one entered the woman's apartment. Experts collected blood samples and fingerprints, but DNA analysis was not possible in 1985. The lead investigators soaked a piece of cotton in the trace of the bite on Sherry's body, hoping that the attacker's saliva could be left behind as a clue to catch the killer. Furthermore, he informed the police about the disappearance of the document. Detectives were unable to find an explanation for this unusual occurrence. After a week and a half, they discovered Sherry's car in a parking lot 4 kilometers from her apartment. It was unlocked, with the keys in the ignition. Forensic experts attempted to locate fingerprints, but were unsuccessful. Either the criminals only touched it while wearing gloves, or they removed all fingerprints. A robbery occurred 2 months after the murder, which took place just a few hundred meters from Sherry's home. Detectives immediately discovered numerous parallels. 2 criminals broke into a stranger's apartment through the garage, threatened the owner with a gun, and took stereo equipment. The lead investigator suspected that these 2 were responsible for the woman's murder, so the police searched for them through witness accounts. They made approximate composite sketches of the suspects and discovered that both men were Latino, but they were never found. However, investigators showed little interest in finding out the truth, which irritated Sherry's parents. Her father visited the police station on a regular basis, inquired about the investigation's status, and requested that the detectives consider various versions. He even asked them to look closer at John's ex-girlfriend Stephanie Lazarus, who was also a police officer. Sharia repeatedly told her father that she was obsessed with John, but the investigators laughed it off and told him to watch fewer detective shows. Stephanie couldn't accept John's departure after learning he was going to marry another woman. Stephanie came to Sherry's workplace and told her that their marriage was doomed and that she and John would get back together sooner or later. In addition, she claimed that John had already slept with her after getting engaged to Sherry. Of course, Sherry was very upset after this visit. When she returned home, she told John what had happened, and he admitted that he had slept with Stephanie. After learning of his engagement, the young woman begged him to come over, spoke of her love, and urged him to return to her. But he refused, saying he loved Sherry and planned to marry her. Stephanie then offered to sleep with him one last time, and John accepted. He apologized to Sherry and admitted it was a huge mistake on his part. The woman eventually forgave him and the incident with Stephanie faded away. However, Stephanie continued to visit their home without warning under various pretexts. One time, she came with a set of skis and announced that John promised to wax them for her the next time she entered their apartment when the man was not present. Sherry was surprised to see Stephanie in her living room when asked what she was doing. Apparently, the woman used her police badge and the security letter to enter Stephanie's apartment otherwise. A duplicate key was required otherwise. She could not have entered without breaking the log. Sherry also noticed that someone was following her while she and John were sitting in a restaurant, and the woman saw someone staring at them intently. When she looked at this person, he immediately left. Sherry couldn't see his face because it was covered with a hood. Unknown calls also frequently arrived on their home phone, and Sherry suspected it could be Stephanie. The victim's father told detectives about all of these incidents, but they ignored his words because they were certain that the murder was committed by the two Mexicans who robbed an apartment near Sherry's house. 3 months after the murder, some documents from Sherry's case disappeared from the police station, including detectives' records of the investigation progress. The police were unable to locate the journals, but there were no significant leads. The case has remained unsolved for years. 7 years later, the lead investigator on the case retired, and the victim's father decided to meet with his replacement, hoping that he would take his job more seriously. Furthermore, it was 1993, and police were already actively using DNA analysis technology to solve crimes. Sherry's father requested a DNA analysis and offered to pay for it, but the detective declined due to the lack of a single suspect to compare the obtained profile to. Meanwhile, John started a new family and reunited with Stephanie. They planned to go to Hawaii together, but something unusual happened before that. The man called the detective and asked if they had any new evidence. Stephanie was a rising star in the police department, earning higher ranks, twice becoming Detective of the Year, and maintaining an impeccable reputation. Despite her marriage to another officer, she continued to sleep with John. In 2001, a separate unit was formed in Los Angeles to work on unsolved murders. They were assigned Sherry's case, along with thousands of similar cases, and the detectives began their investigation, left behind after a bite 2 years later. Detectives took up the case and sent all available evidence to the lab. Due to high demand, they had to wait nearly 2 years for the results, which came in January 2005. The evidence included nail fragments and blood samples from Sherry's apartment. Forensic scientists only needed to study the sample from the bite mark on her body. However, they couldn't find the vial for a day until they discovered it by the wall of a large refrigerator. After studying the sample, experts discovered foreign DNA belonging to an unknown woman. This lasted until February 2009, when a new detective took over Sherry's case and began studying the materials left by previous investigators. He questioned the robbery theory after discovering DNA from another woman near the victim's bite mark. Detectives reasoned that the motives for this crime could be very different, so they compiled a list of all the women who could be linked to Sherry's murder. As a result, they were able to collect 5 names, including Stephanie, the victim's work colleague, and 3 other young women. The detectives initially questioned Stephanie's involvement, citing her reputation and successful police career. For this reason, he decided to investigate the other suspects first. Together with other investigators, they quickly concluded that 3 women on this list had no connection to Sherry's death. They lacked motives and had alibi. Following that, they began investigating the nurse who worked with Sherry. File stated that their relationship was tense, and the police obtained a sample of her DNA from the trash she threw away. Experts extracted the profile and discovered that it did not match the saliva found at the bite mark location, leaving the detectives with only 1 suspect. Stephanie and several colleagues agreed to keep this information secret until they could obtain solid evidence or disprove this theory. None of them wanted to accuse a police officer with an impeccable reputation of murder, and Stephanie could easily ruin their careers using her connections. They began secretly gathering information on her, trying to find any connection to the murder. Interestingly, the woman worked in the same building on the same floor as them. Because of this, the investigators had to take many precautions and not even mention her name in their notes. Soon, the detectives discovered the first interesting fact during the years of the murder. Stephanie owned a .38 caliber revolver, the same type of gun that was used to shoot Sherry. They also learned that the victim had repeatedly complained about strange and even aggressive behavior from Stephanie. The fact that the police officer came to Sherry's workplace in her uniform and said rude things to her seemed suspicious. Even more suspicion was added by the fact that Stephanie had broken into Sherry's gated community and even into her apartment several times. After analyzing the reports and photos from the crime scene, the detectives concluded that the possible robbery seemed staged. Nothing was taken from the apartment, not even the valuable items that were prominently displayed, but instead only a player and stereo were taken away. Moreover, the shooter had to be well versed in how the gun worked in extreme conditions. They were able to wrap the gun barrel with a blanket in such a way that the neighbors did not hear a single shot. It is unlikely that a low-level thief of players could possess such skills, but a trained and experienced police officer could. Another fact indicating Stephanie's involvement was a stolen marriage registration certificate found in her apartment. Why would some random burglars look for this document and take it with them, leaving a whole box of jewelry behind? But for Stephanie, it could have had significant symbolic value. Perhaps killing Sherry was not enough for her, or she had planned to break into her apartment only for this document, but the woman caught her in the act. In the end, the detectives learned that 2 weeks after the murder, Stephanie came to the police station and filed a report of theft. According to this information, someone had broken into her car, which was left near the pier, and stolen several items, including a sports bag, clothes, videotapes, and a .38 caliber revolver. Given all the facts presented, the moment with the gun seemed very suspicious. Detectives suspected that she intentionally got rid of the weapon, disguising it as a theft. Furthermore, she filed a report at a different police station where nobody knew her, which seemed very strange since her colleagues would have taken the case with the utmost responsibility. As a result, the detectives decided to obtain a DNA sample from Stephanie. Several officers undercover followed her for a week until they finally had the opportunity to get it. On May 28, 2009, Stephanie and her stepdaughter stopped at a cafe for a snack. As soon as they left, the officers took the glass she drank from and sent it to the lab. The next day, the result was ready a full match. Despite the many factors pointing to Stephanie's involvement, the detectives were still shocked. It was hard for them to believe that a high-ranking and respected police officer was connected to the murder, but the DNA results were indisputable. However, at that moment, they did not have time for these thoughts, and investigators began developing a plan to arrest her. None of them wanted to do this in the middle of the police station in front of hundreds of officers. Moreover, Stephanie had extensive connections, and the detectives decided to lure her away from prying eyes. The chief of the Los Angeles Police Department was unofficially informed that one of his subordinates was suspected of the murder. The chief ordered the detectives not to approach Stephanie while she had her service or personal weapon with her. The detectives considered arresting her in her home, which was risky because she lived with her husband and stepdaughter. They devised a plan to entice the person who outranked them to surrender their weapon. They found holding cells in the basement of the police department designed for temporary detention of criminals, where anyone entering had to surrender their weapon. This led to the creation of a legend saint. Stephanie went with them to the basement where the suspect was supposed to be held. After the woman surrendered her weapon, they went to the interrogation room, but there was no suspect there. The detectives gradually laid out the cards on the table and asked Stephanie questions about Sherry's murder. At first, they simply said that they needed to ask her a few questions about an old case related to her ex-boyfriend over the course. The detectives let her go, but at the end of the corridor, Stephanie was met by several police officers wearing handcuffs. 23 years after the murder, the woman was arrested. Given Stephanie's extensive police experience, all attempts to speak with her during interrogations yielded no results. She had a perfect understanding of the situation. There was DNA evidence against her found near the bite mark on the victim's body, which was extremely difficult to refute. Nevertheless, she denied any involvement and maintained her innocence. As a result, the detectives were forced to prepare documents for transfer to court over the next several years. Stephanie was housed in a women's prison until the first hearings began in 2012. It took the police 3 years to basically rebuild the case from the ground up because their predecessors believed in a failed robbery. It was necessary to redo all of the materials, focusing specifically on Stephanie. Throughout the trial, the woman insisted on her innocence. Stephanie's lawyer questioned the DNA test results and argued that there were no suspicions against her during the initial investigation. However, the prosecution believed that Stephanie entered Sherry's apartment and shot her once. Sherry resisted and a struggle ensued, eventually leading to Stephanie's death. The trial concluded on March 8, 2012, with Stephanie being found guilty of murder by the jury. She received a sentence of 27 years to life in prison, plus an additional 2 years for using a service weapon. The judge reduced her sentence by 1,000 days, citing her good behavior and time spent in custody awaiting trial. Sherry's parents attempted to sue the detectives who first worked on the case, despite the fact that the victim's father had instructed them to look into Stephanie from the start. They ignored his words. This begs the question, were they purposefully concealing their colleagues' involvement, or did they truly believe she was not involved? In the first case, it would have been a serious crime. whereas in the second case, it would have been simple negligence and disregard for significant facts. The statute of limitations expired in this case, so the court did not prosecute the police officers. Stephanie filed an appeal after the trial, but it was quickly rejected. She still denies her guilt and can only petition for early release in 2039. Sherry's ex-husband John lost interest in investigating her murder and began a new life. Please share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and thank you for watching. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Concerned drivers who had spotted an abandoned car on the highway started calling Thurston County, Washington police on August 31, 2022. Officers discovered that their worries were not unjustified when they got to the designated spot. The key was still in the ignition, the driver's side door was open, and the door and steering wheel were covered in dried blood. Beside the car, on the ground, was a broken phone. Whatever happened on the phone happened very quickly, because it was last used at 5:10 p.m. and found at 5:30 p.m. The car was registered to Kenneth Davis from Olympia, Washington, which is 25 minutes away from the location where the car was found, according to the police's check of the registration number. But when they got in touch with Kenneth, they found out that the car had been taken by Gabriel Davis, Kenneth's 16-year-old son, at 4 p.m. Gabriel never returned from school after leaving for football practice. Blood and a smashed phone were clearly bad indicators. When such an incident occurs, a number of scenarios immediately spring to mind, such as a fight or perhaps even a murder. The police rushed to learn as much as they could about the boy. The 16-year-old Gabriel Davis hails from Olympia, Washington. His enthusiasm for football has not changed, despite a recent sharp decline in his academic performance. He never skipped a training session because he took it seriously. He was therefore immediately noticed when he failed to appear at the stadium on August 31st. No one knew where he was. Not even Justin Hume, his best friend. The police immediately began a thorough search after finding Gabriel's car, the broken phone, and the blood. Helicopters and search teams were involved in the ongoing search through the night and into the next morning. People who said they had seen the boy began calling in droves as word spread about his disappearance. The teenager was spotted strolling down the highway, according to 5 witnesses. He was walking toward the park by himself. Gabriel even responded to a caller who inquired about his well-being by saying, "Yes." The young man's mysterious disappearance was not the first or even the second incident in the county, which was the most horrifying part. Within 5 miles of where Gabriel's car was discovered, 2 other young boys had disappeared during the previous 6 years. Locals wanted the police to act right away because they believed he was the 3rd victim of the same kidnapper. Logan Schendelman and Matthew Anfelt were the names of the missing boys. Matthew and Logan played a lot of sports in their senior year, just like Gabriel did. There were notable parallels between the cases, especially in Logan's case. He had no reason to be in the southern part of the county, and his car was also discovered abandoned on the side of the road. Additionally, witnesses claimed to have seen the boys prior to their disappearances in both cases. But Logan and Matthew were never located. The FBI became involved early on because of these parallels and the urgency of Gabriel's investigation. The manager of North Carolina Power Systems, a company that specializes in diesel engine repairs, called the police while the massive search for the missing teen under mysterious circumstances was in progress. She stated that Daniel McCaw, one of their staff members, had not been showing up for work for 4 days and was not returning calls. She asked the officers to come to his house and see how he was doing because this was unusual for him, and he had never been missing before. When the officers got to his home in Orting, Washington, which is 45 minutes east of Olympia, they knocked on the door but got no answer. Through the doggy door, Daniel's German Shepherd dog ran outside. At the same time, they smelled a rotten smell, so they looked around for a way to get inside the house. An unlocked door to the laundry room allowed the officers entry. Daniel was lying on the floor when they got inside. He had been shot in the head and was lying in a pool of blood. At first, they thought he had committed suicide because there were no indications of forced entry. Nevertheless, no weapon was found close to the body, and a follow-up examination showed several stab wounds and an abdominal gunshot wound. The advanced state of decomposition made it difficult to determine the precise nature of the neck wounds. They discovered 2 empty holsters and casings for 9mm and .45 caliber firearms at the crime scene. Investigators came to the conclusion that the offender or offenders had used two distinct firearms, most likely taken from the victim. Only locals and the mailman had access to the man's elevated neighborhood residence, according to neighbors. How the offender could have muffled the gunshots was not immediately clear. It turned out, though, that although the locals were used to carrying guns, they did not meddle in one another's affairs. Even if someone heard something, they wouldn't think to call the police because they lived in relative isolation. During her talk with the police, Daniel's boss made a very intriguing comment. Daniel had split from Amanda Olafson, his fiancée, just 2 weeks prior. North Carolina Power Systems was another employer of Amanda's. Gabriel, her son, was the same Gabriel who had vanished the day before. It was an odd turn of events, and now the investigators had to figure out whether the murder of the 51-year-old man and the disappearance of the 16-year-old boy were related in any way. Thankfully, they could question Gabriel directly. On the evening of September 2nd, they located him in Thurston County, only 3 miles from the location of his car. Gabriel was found wearing only shorts, without a shirt, shoes, or even socks, and by himself in the dark in the woods. Gabriel said he didn't remember anything and didn't know where he had been when the detective asked him what had happened to him. The police found his response odd. Gabriel had no scratches, but his feet should have had some abrasions if he had been lost in the woods for 36 hours. The blood in his car also didn't match this. Gabriel didn't seem to be able to recall what had happened over the last 36 hours, possibly due to drug use. But in the end, the teenager's account was altered. He admitted that he broke the phone out of fear that the police would discover something that could be used against him. He went on to say that he was afraid of getting hurt, so he couldn't tell what had happened to him. This was a very strange and alarming statement, but since they couldn't force the boy to give an explanation, they let Gabriel return home to his family while detectives worked to determine what had happened. Kenneth, Gabriel's father, called the police the following day. He claimed that although his son did play a role in Daniel's death, it was only because Daniel's biker friends forced him to do so in order to steal something from the victim's safe. According to Kenneth, the biker gang approached his son because Gabriel had lived there and was familiar with the house's layout. If the boy didn't comply with their demands, they threatened to hurt him. Gabriel then confided in his friend Justin Hume about his problems, and the two came up with a solution. The police's evidence, however, painted an entirely different picture. Although the victim and the Amigos Motorcycle Club, which is connected to the infamous Bandidos Motorcycle Club, were connected, the police did not discover any proof that the Amigos Club was involved in the murder. In addition, one of Daniel's friends, who was also a club member, went to the victim's house a few hours after the body was found. When the detective told him about Daniel's passing, he was truly upset. Whatever was in the victim's safe, it had to be identified. When Daniel's mother gave the police the safe combination, she said that the contents would surprise and shock them. Amanda had called and told her that nobody knew how to open it, she said. Approximately 212 different kinds of weapons and ammunition, along with a few coins kept in plastic packets, were discovered by the detectives when they opened the safe. There were several packets containing illegally obtained pills and an empty jewelry box. There were details about his biker club in the notepad. There was obviously something the size of an ammunition box on the bottom shelf. Daniel took his safety very seriously, which was lucky for the investigators. He had a number of cameras in his home in addition to weapons. They assisted the police in figuring out what happened the night of the murder. The detectives discovered that Justin and Gabrielle spent a weekend getaway with their loved ones at Lake Panther on August 28. They left the campsite shortly after midnight and came back at about 6:30 a.m. The surveillance cameras at Daniel's house recorded their exact location, but their relatives were unaware of their whereabouts. Two young, slender men came up to the victim's house from the backyard at 1:50 a.m. On his belt, one of them carried a canister of pepper spray or something. The men wore masks that partially obscured their faces. One of them had on a ski mask, the other a medical mask and a baseball cap. They had flashlights on hand. Through the dog door came the young men. After a while, nothing happened. But at 2:41 a.m., the homeowner left the garage, went inside, and vanished from the camera. 6 minutes later, his German Shepherd was seen on camera hastily leaving the house through the dog door. After leaving through the side door, The unidentified men wandered for a few minutes between the house and the garage while carrying what appeared to be a toolbox or a crate of military ammunition. At 2:52 a.m., they finally left the crime scene, bringing with them what appeared to be a toolbox or a military ammunition crate. Gabriel informed his father that Justin followed Daniel after he came inside from the garage, stabbed him, and then there was a gunshot. The safe was in the garage, so Gabriel went there. At that moment, he says he heard 2 gunshots. On August 29th, the guys went back to their regular lives after disposing of the weapons close to Daniel's house. Gabriel, though, vanished prior to the 31st. He claimed that after bikers found him, they dragged him from his vehicle and struck his head against the steering wheel, spilling blood inside. Then, after beating him for a while driving around with him in a Suburban, the kidnappers let him go. Additionally, they mysteriously took his shoes and shirt and looked through the car for the stolen item from the safe. They found nothing because he didn't steal anything. As a result, the teenager chose to portray himself as a victim, similar to Danielle. That being said, this version isn't cohesive. Why couldn't the teenager enter the house and flee right away if bikers were the ones forcing him to commit the crime? Why wasn't everything finished sooner if, as Kenneth claimed, they had planned it? It was illogical. Once more, why did they enter the house when the safe was in the garage if the goal was to steal something? In any case, Justin and Gabriel were searched and taken into custody by police on the evening of September 2. They discovered a black ski mask and a handheld flashlight in Justin's home, and a black mask in Gabriel's vehicle. Gabriel showed the investigators where he had thrown the weapons close to the former Olympia Brewery in Tumwater after the police arrested the teenagers on September the 2nd. Similar weapons to the one used to shoot the victim were found by the detectives, a .45 caliber Sig Sauer pistol and a 9mm Ruger handgun. More than a dozen knives were also discovered. The firearms were found inside an ammunition box, the same type that vanished from the victim's safe. Although Daniel had friends among the bikers, the police did not discover any indication that they planned to murder the man or even steal anything from his home. The real reason for the crime is not disclosed. However, Gabriel's past might conceal the crime's motivation. He has encountered numerous difficulties in spite of his youth. Gabriel and his older sister were at the center of a terrible custody battle that started when Gabriel's parents divorced when he was just 3 years old. A 2010 court ruling stated that the children lived with their father on weekends and with their mother during the week. After Amanda separated from an abusive husband and remarried twice, the decision was not reviewed. Kenneth, however, sued her after she moved in with Daniel in 2018, alleging that the kids' grades suffered and they frequently skipped class. Additionally, he claimed that Daniel was violent, threatened Gabriel with a weapon, and even threatened Gabriel's sister, who is now 20 years old, and her boyfriend. Daniel acknowledged yelling at the sister's boyfriend when he became embroiled in the custody dispute, but he denied threatening him. The argument started when the boyfriend broke into the house and took a phone charger, but he now feels bad about how he handled the matter. In any event, a judge in 2018 ordered that Gabriel, then 12 years old, and his sister, then 16 years old, live with their father during the week and with their mother on the weekends. The chaos didn't stop there. Because of her subpar grades, Gabriel's sister was expelled from school in January 2019. The girl reported to the school psychologist that her father had grabbed her wrist with force and that he acted aggressively, particularly when intoxicated. This only had a short-term impact. It is unclear if this was the case or if Amanda and Daniel pressured her to obtain full custody. The children were ultimately ordered to live with their father by the court. Amanda and Daniel's arguments served as the background for all of this. According to Daniel's boss, they may have broken up because of his devotion to the biker club. Amanda gave him a choice, either she or the club, refusing to make concessions to the club. His reaction is unknown, but neighbors noticed her removing items from his home on August 13, about 2 weeks prior to the murder. Gabriel made friends with Justin Hume during this period, who also had a history of getting into trouble at a young age. He was accused of making false bomb threats in high school and threatening a classmate with a knife in middle school. As a result, he had to transfer schools as soon as the academic year started. There are numerous pictures of the boy at the shooting range with Gabriel, demonstrating his intense interest in firearms. They caused mischief at school. Daniel's murder might have been retaliation for the way his relationship with Amanda ended. Or maybe Amanda is lying. Anyhow, only a teenager could imagine a biker gang sending a kid to carry out their duties. The Raymond Hall Juvenile Detention Center is currently housing Gabriel and Justin. Among the many charges against them are first and second-degree murder. Because of the high probability of them trying to flee, the bail amount for each teen is set at $1 million. When police arrived to arrest Gabriel, Justin's family was seen packing their belongings into a car, suggesting that they were probably planning to flee. Gabriel has previously staged a disappearance to avoid being held accountable for his actions. The teenagers will face adult trials. Notably, the Supreme Court in Washington decided in May 2021 that a person under the age of 21 cannot be automatically sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. Therefore, after serving 20 years, they might be eligible for release if found guilty. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. A 19-year-old woman was discovered dead in her own apartment. Investigators quickly discovered several disturbing facts, but they were unable to solve the case for several years before revealing the truth. Everyone was shocked and outraged by the unexpected outcome. Nona Dismade was born December 26, 1985, in Russellville, Arkansas. She grew up in a large family with 4 brothers and 1 sister. When Nona was 10 years old, her father died. This event was a tragedy for the entire family, but they were about to receive an even more devastating shock. Later, the young woman told her mother that her father had repeatedly subjected her to violence. She was afraid to speak up while he was still alive, and her confession shocked her mother. Even after such a tragic experience, the woman had no idea what her husband was capable of. Nona found the strength to move on and eventually decided to assist other young women who had been victims of similar crimes. She joined a volunteer organization to help children in need during her school years. Nona started dating a guy named Kevin Jones. The young woman also competed in beauty contests and achieved significant success. Nona won several local contests, qualifying her to compete for the title of Miss Arkansas. In addition, the young woman was an active member of the local church and sang in the choir. When Nona was 19, she and her boyfriend enrolled in Arkansas, which launched an attack on a university in their hometown. The young woman decided to rent her own apartment because she wanted to start her own life. After her first year, her boyfriend changed his major and transferred to another university, which was an hour and a half away from their home. By then, the couple had been dating for about 5 years, and this was their first time living in different cities. Kevin returned home for the Christmas holiday. He stopped by Nona's apartment before driving to his parents' house, which was about 16 kilometers away from the city. The following day, they both had plans. Nona had to take her final 2 exams while also meeting with a young woman from the volunteer organization. Kevin planned to take his mother, a librarian, to a school event on December 15th, around 9 a.m. Nona messaged Kevin, wishing him a good day. He was expecting Nona to call him after her exams and tell him how they went, but she wasn't returning his calls or messages, so he became concerned around 6 p.m. While attending a school event with his mother, Kevin couldn't help but wonder why Nona hadn't answered her phone all day. Kevin eventually decided to call his friend, who worked as a pizza deliveryman in the neighborhood where Nona's apartment complex was located. Kevin asked him to come by and see if everything was fine. His friend arrived quickly and noticed that Nona's car was parked in the parking lot, and the lights in her apartment were turned on, but no one was answering the door. He told Kevin about it, and Kevin told his mother that he was worried about his girlfriend and wanted to go to her apartment to make sure everything was fine. The woman agreed, and they headed to the apartment complex together. Kevin's friend was waiting for them there, and the 3 of them began knocking on the door, but there was no response. Kevin had a key, but he left it at home that day because he had no intention of stopping by. A few minutes later, Kevin and his friend attempted to open the front door because they suspected something bad had happened to Nona, but they were unable to do so. Kevin then remembered that there were sliding glass doors in the back of the apartment. When he approached them, he immediately noticed something strange. Nona was concerned about her own safety, so she installed a special removable grill on the back glass door whenever she was alone at home. They are primarily used against burglars. They are simple to install and remove from within the home, but extremely difficult to do from the outside. But this time, there was no grill, and the doors were unlocked. When they entered the apartment, they noticed blood on the blinds and discovered a shocking sight in the bedroom. Nona was lying face down in a pool of blood, wearing only socks. Kevin rushed over to her and attempted to lift her, only to realize she was dead. Meanwhile, his mother contacted police investigators, who arrived at the apartment and began investigating the crime scene. They immediately suspected that the victim had been struck on the head several times with a table lamp found on the floor. Investigators discovered a bloody fingerprint on the table lamp, possibly left by the killer next to the victim's body. They also found an empty condom wrapper on the bedside table and no signs of forced entry. Medical examiners confirmed that the table lamp was used as a weapon, with the metal base matching. Experts suggest that the perpetrator may have used a condom found in the apartment, making it difficult to determine the presence of sexual violence. However, the crime scene was not thoroughly examined, with investigators failing to collect blood samples from the blinds on the back door or search for shoe prints in the apartment, which could have been used. When he entered the apartment and ran to her, he tried to lift her up, and upon realizing that she was dead, he hugged and held her. The police found this behavior strange and suspected that Kevin had done it deliberately by hugging the victim and getting covered in her blood he may have destroyed. Potential evidence and compromised the crime scene. Why it would be difficult for investigators to prove his guilt. For example, if Kevin's clothes or nails were found with the victim's blood, it could easily be explained that he hugged the victim after discovering her body. Another suspicious moment was that Kevin went to check on his girlfriend not alone but with his mother, and he also invited his friend to the apartment. Investigators believed that this way he secured 2 witnesses who found the body with him and saw him covered in blood. The police talked to Kevin for a long time right outside Nona's apartment, and from their questions the young man realized that they considered him a suspect. Then he said something that strengthened the investigators' conviction that he was the murderer, recognizing that he was suspected. Kevin began arguing with the investigators, stating that he constantly watches Law and Order and is aware that they are attempting to convict him. These words also appear strange to the police. In addition, they discovered that the key to Nona's apartment was only with 3 people: the girlfriend, her mother, and Kevin. Given the lack of evidence of a break-in, they assumed the man used his copy of the key to enter the apartment. Kevin was interrogated at the police station for several hours. During the interrogation, he told investigators his version of events and insisted he had nothing to do with the murder. However, investigators directly accused him of the murder and urged him to confess. Around 4 p.m., after numerous attempts to call his girlfriend, Kevin sent a message asking if she was still alive, despite the fact that Nona had already died. When the police left the interrogation room and left Kevin alone, he stood up and began punching the back of the chair for the investigators. This became another indication that the young man was violent and capable of murder. However, the police found no evidence linking Kevin to the murder. Medical experts discovered that Nona attempted to defend herself, which would have resulted in bruises and scratches on the killer's body, but none were found on Kevin. Despite this, the detectives remained convinced he was guilty and attempted to gather evidence. After interviewing over 50 people, the police were unable to find any witnesses. However, after speaking with known friends, they discovered that shortly before her death, she had begun seeing another man secretly from Kevin. Investigators immediately checked this person, but he had a solid alibi for the time of the murder, which raised suspicions about Kevin. She was killed with extreme cruelty, which in most similar cases indicates the killer's strong personal animosity toward the victim. A few days later, Kevin agreed to take a polygraph test. The operator concluded that the young man provided numerous false answers, and one of the investigators claimed that this was the worst polygraph result he had ever seen in his 28 years of experience. However, there is one caveat: the person who read the device's readings was not a certified specialist. He was simply a police officer who had not received the necessary training to work with this device, which did not bother the detectives. Following the interrogation, they increased the pressure on Kevin, attempting to force a confession. They claimed that all his acquaintances and relatives already knew that he killed Nona. The police really told everyone that Kevin's guilt was practically proven, and that he would soon be arrested. They convinced the victim's parents that he was the one who killed their daughter, although they refused to believe it. Until the end, the day before the funeral, a farewell ceremony was supposed to take place in the church, and Kevin had been helping to organize it since early in the morning. Later on, detectives called him in for questioning again, promising to release him before the start of the ceremony. In the end, Kevin spent 7 hours at the police station and missed the ceremony. Nobody present knew he was being questioned, so many assumed that Kevin didn't show up due to guilt over what had happened. Nona's parents didn't even want him to come to the funeral, as investigators had already convinced them of his involvement in the murder. But Kevin still came and sat far away from her relatives. After examining evidence from the victim's apartment, experts discovered a fingerprint on the light bulb in the desk lamp. The fingerprint was left by blood, indicating that it could only have been made during or after the murder. Despite this, investigators continued to search for Kevin for months. This request was granted, and the trial began in a different city. The defense called a witness who provided Kevin with a solid alibi. A plumber had visited his parents' house that morning and saw him around 10:30 a.m. The prosecution insisted that Kevin had time to go to Nondes and commit the murder because, according to medical experts, she died between 10:30 a.m. and 1 p.m. They also shared an interesting fact. Kevin had turned off his phone between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m., which coincided with the victim's murder. Furthermore, data from Kevin's phone revealed that he only began calling his girlfriend at 4 p.m., despite claims during questioning that he had been trying to reach her all day. However, at the time, the young man may have meant both calls and messages. Lawyers presented 2 additional witnesses, both of whom testified that Kevin did not commit the murder. One of them was Kevin's grandmother, who stated that on that particular day, she saw her grandson near the gas station and gave him money to go have a snack at a cafe. Another witness saw the man between 12:30 and 1 p.m. at the restaurant, and the establishment's cameras captured him eating lunch. As a result, the young man could not have committed the murder while simultaneously returning in time. Lawyers also questioned the possibility that Kevin left a bloody fingerprint on the lamp during the murder. In that case, when the body was discovered, the blood should have dried up. Experts who came to the apartment that evening wrote in the report that the bloody fingerprint was slightly damp, confirming that Kevin could have left it accidentally when he found Nona's body with his mother and friend. However, fingerprints were also found on the table lamp that was used to hit the victim, but they did not belong to Kevin. He determined that after death, the victim's body lay on her back for some time before being turned face down. This could imply that the young woman is still subjected to violence. The expert confirmed that he found no direct evidence of this, but added that he could not rule out such a possibility. The prosecution claimed that no fingerprints or DNA were found on the empty contraceptive package found next to the victim's body. However, a retest revealed male DNA, which did not belong to Kevin and did not match any databases. The trial lasted over a year and was concluded by the jury in July 2007. And now that he had avoided punishment despite their client's acquittal, the legal team promised to keep working on the case and find the true killer. Given the police's obsession with Kevin, no one expected them to finally do their job correctly. The lawyers first extracted DNA from the contraceptive packaging. Compared to all the men who knew Nona, all of these people volunteered to provide samples, and none of them matched. This went on for 2 months until an unexpected event occurred in September 2007. When the police arrested Gary Dunn for robbery, things became more interesting. First, this man had previously been convicted of assaulting another woman. Second, he lived in the same housing complex as Nona. In the early stages of the investigation, the police considered Gary as a suspect but quickly switched their focus to Kevin as the killer. The boy's lawyers requested a DNA test, which revealed that a sample from the contraceptive packaging matched Gary's DNA. After the young woman's murder, investigators even questioned Gary using a polygraph. Gary did go shopping with his mother, just not at the time of the murder, but 2 days before, as evidenced by receipts with purchase dates, which Gary even showed to the police, but they simply ignored such important information. They noticed that the dates on the checks did not match the day of the murder. This was stated in the reports, but for unknown reasons, they either ignored it or failed to notice that the days did not match. Finally, experts compared his fingerprints to those of unknown table lamps, and they matched. However, a serious issue arose here. The fingerprints and DNA matched, but not completely. The judicial system follows certain guidelines. In Gary's case, the necessary coincidence indicators for determining guilt were insufficient, despite the fact that the DNA and fingerprints were unlikely to belong to someone else. The investigators were likely guilty because they did not thoroughly examine all available evidence immediately after the murder, as required by the rules. It is possible that the DNA samples deteriorated. He was on parole in 2002. He attacked a woman who was running in the park, knocked her down, and began beating her, threatening to kill her. The woman escaped and ran to her car. Meanwhile, Gary fled the scene but was quickly apprehended. The man served 19 months in prison and was released early. Interestingly, his DNA sample was not included in the database. Gary's trial began in April 2010, and there were plenty of surprises in store for everyone. His own wife testified against him, claiming he was an aggressive and dangerous man. Gary frequently raised his hand against her, and the woman was terrified for her life, so she was afraid to leave him. But the most intriguing detail was that, a few weeks before the victim's death, she noticed her husband spying on Nona through her apartment window. Based on this, the prosecution assumed that the man planned the attack because of his criminal history. Gary had a history of violence, and he may have been keeping a close eye on Nona because she lived only a few meters away. On December 15th, he decided to act. He allegedly knocked on her apartment door and entered under false pretenses, grabbing the table lamp and striking her several times before assaulting and killing her, because Gary used contraception. Medical experts were unable to definitively state whether the victim had been sexually assaulted, but all evidence pointed to it. Gary's lawyers denied his involvement, but he had no real alibi, so they concentrated on blaming Kevin, according to the lawyers. Kevin discovered that the young woman was cheating on him and killed her. Kevin had to testify in court and listen as they attempted to portray him as the true criminal. The prosecution was unable to use Gary's fingerprints or DNA as evidence, resulting in a mistrial. A new trial was soon held, with a key difference being testimony from a woman who Gary nearly killed in 2002. The woman described how the man attacked her and how she barely escaped. Despite this, the second trial was declared a mistrial. First, he tried to kidnap a woman from a church parking lot, but she fought him back. A few hours later, Gary stripped in front of another woman in a mall parking lot and was quickly arrested. Given his criminal record, and the fact that he is practically Nona's killer, the court decided to sentence him to the maximum term. Gary was sentenced to 15 years in prison for 2 incidents and is still serving his sentence. Despite his right to petition for early release, authorities are unlikely to grant him such an opportunity. They also have the right to charge him with murder for the 3rd time, but they are not rushing to do so. The likelihood of the new trial ending in the same way as the previous 2 is high, so investigators are gathering more information. During the trial preparation, Kevin discovered that Gary's polygraph test results revealed lies, but investigators did not consider him a suspect. Unfortunately, his lawsuit was dismissed due to the statute of limitations. As a result, negligent police officers did not face any consequences for allowing the real killer to roam free for years and may not be punished in the future. Please leave your thoughts on this story in the comments, and thank you for watching. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. David Edward Moust, in contrast to other serial killers, was viewed as an outlier, a lunatic, who didn't match the conventional description of a ruthless, malevolent, uncontrollable killer. Rather, he was someone who truly regretted his actions and wanted to be imprisoned for the rest of his life in order to protect others. He screamed for assistance, but nobody responded. What events in his life shaped who he is now? Let's examine the tale of a man who was disappointed by his parents' separation, a difficult childhood, and an ineffective legal system. The story is about a serial killer called Deranged Dave. George and Ava Moust welcomed David Edward Moust into the world on April 5, 1954, in Connellsville, Pennsylvania. The family had 3 other children in addition to David. The Moust family had a difficult life. Ava and George both experienced challenging upbringings. The parents were unable to provide a loving home for their own children because his father was placed for adoption when he was 12 years old. George tried to avoid his wife, who needed constant attention, was emotionally unstable and self-centered, by being away from home a lot. Their mother had a nervous breakdown shortly after the birth of David's younger brother Jeffrey and spent a month in the hospital. She might have experienced postpartum depression, although at the time medicine didn't fully understand or support women with such conditions. David's parents divorced in 1963 when he was just 7 years old. David's father reportedly started the divorce because he had stopped providing for his ex-wife and the 4 kids for a year, leaving the woman to care for the family alone. Life at their parents' house was tough for all the kids, but David had it the worst, according to David's sister. Maybe because he looked so much like his father, their mother's hatred of her ex-husband was passed on to her son. Ava asserted that she was powerless over the boy. David allegedly attempted to kill his brother Jeffrey twice by the time he was 8 years old, once by pushing him into a lagoon and stepping on his fingers to prevent him from climbing out, and again by trying to burn Jeffrey's bed. Additionally, according to his mother, she frequently looked in her son's pockets to make sure he hadn't stolen anything. She said he would take her valuables and sell them, all allegedly before he was 9 years old. Ava said she no longer wanted to deal with a challenging, troublesome child when he turned 9. The 9-year-old child was admitted to a mental health facility after she went to the court and claimed she needed assistance because he was mentally ill. The doctors and staff, however, did not observe any of the behavior that Ava had described. Instead, they came to the conclusion that the mother had just left her son behind. It made the boy's already challenging life at home even more so. Numerous other patients, including those with aggressive criminal tendencies, developmental disorders, and schizophrenia, had to share common areas with him. David felt confused and angry. Given that both his mother and father had deserted him, he felt stuck and had nowhere to go. He waited by the window on visitation days, hoping to see his mother, but she never showed up. In an attempt to comfort him, the institution's staff offered explanations for his mother's absence, such as her illness or another reason. The boy eventually came to terms with his circumstances. He and the other kids just thought their parents were in need of a vacation. In part, the kids were correct, but in reality, they hadn't been abandoned, at least not in David's case. As terrible as it sounds, such institutions were used in those days to essentially leave a child there. Later, David remembered a boy who was sent to the mental institution by his parents, who treated it like a summer camp while they took their own vacations, and who spent many summers at the clinic. Their son miraculously recovered from his mental illness by the time they got back from their vacation. Doctors evaluated David's intelligence right away. He was always able to express himself clearly and showed remarkable skills remembering sports events with vividness. As a result, the medical staff quickly came to believe that David's mother, Ava, rather than her son, was mentally ill. In order to send David home, they waited for her to recover. But each time they attempted to arrange for the child to return home, his mother turned him away. The clinic staff was forced to formally recognize David's lack of mental abnormalities when he turned 13, but he had nowhere to go yet. As a result, he was moved to a children's home a few blocks from his family's residence. His realization that his relatives lived close by but didn't want to interact with him must have been extremely upsetting. But David ended up with other boys going through adolescence in a shelter. It was only natural for them to try out relationships with one another because they were unable to engage with people of the other sex. Another boy started clamoring for David's attention as soon as he arrived at the children's home. Being extremely persistent, he threatened to tell everyone about David's stay in the mental institution, effectively blackmailing him. Despite his resistance, David would later write in his diary that he gave in and kissed the young blackmailer, feeling instantly repulsed and angry at himself. David adapted to the shelter quite well aside from this incident. Even though David Moust had a rough upbringing, spent time in the clinic, and lived in a shelter, his intelligence was innate and unaffected by these experiences. He maintained his focus and dazzled everyone with his extraordinary memory. Life appeared to be getting better until all of a sudden a sense of anger arose inside of him. By the time he was 15, David had attacked Eddie, another boy. While they were playing together, David began strangling Eddie for no apparent reason. When David noticed that Eddie was practically out of breath, he abruptly stopped. Eddie granted his request for forgiveness. Was this a genuine act of repentance? It's unclear because David might have tried to control himself, had nowhere else to go, and didn't want trouble. But because he wrote about it in his 87-page prison journal, We are aware of this incident. However, David's restraint was short-lived, as he soon tried to choke Daniel, another boy. David seized a rope and wrapped it around Daniel's neck while they were in a room together, just watching TV. When he realized Daniel hadn't done him any harm, he stopped once more. "Enough," I told myself. "Leave the rope," he wrote in the diary, and Daniel fell to the ground. He was analyzing his actions and persuading himself that they were wrong. It was as if I was trapped inside myself and someone else was trying to kill Daniel, and I couldn't stop. David started to believe that he had no control over his thoughts or behavior, which was undoubtedly frightening for a teenager whose life lacked a typical parental role model. David was sent back to the institution for the mentally ill after Daniel, who lived, reported the incident. By the time the teenager turned 17, life appeared to be getting better. He made the decision to go home after he and a few other guys fled the clinic. He was devastated to learn that Ava had married and that her unwanted son had no place in her house. Furthermore, she pretended that David had never existed and told everyone that he was a shame to the family. She persuaded him to enlist in the army in order to get rid of him. It's crucial to remember that it was 1971, during the height of the Vietnam War, but maybe it wasn't the worst choice for the boy, to provide him with a purpose in life, a place to live, and practical skills. He was sent to the recruiter by his mother. After being drafted into the army, David was dispatched to Frankfurt, Germany. He worked as a cook at a military installation that also housed civilians. James McLister, a 13-year-old who everyone called Jimmy, was one of them. On the base, his parents were engineers. It was at the army bowling alley that David and Jimmy first met. David also found another talent. He was a great bowler who competed and made a respectable living doing it. After becoming friends, David and Jimmy spent time together until one night when David woke up in his bed with Jimmy, naked. He became furious. He recommended that Jimmy take a moped ride. The boy obviously viewed him as an older brother, trusted him wholeheartedly, and complied without hesitation. If only he understood David's thoughts. David tied Jimmy to a tree and beat him with a plank he found there after they drove a long way from the base to a location where a World War II bomb crater still existed. Jimmy's killer just untied the body and left it there when Jimmy stopped breathing. David went back to the base and acted as though nothing had occurred. They looked for the boy, of course, but he was only located a month later. Despite being in custody, David managed to persuade the judge that it was a tragic mishap. The boys allegedly damaged the moped, and Jimmy crashed out of it. David hid Jimmy's body because he was afraid and unsure of what to do. He was taken seriously. David was given a 3-year prison sentence because there was no proof of murder. It's interesting to note that David behaved flawlessly while incarcerated, received a diploma, wrote to his family once a week, and learned practical new skills. He was eligible to be considered for early release on parole because of his excellent behavior, but he turned down the offer. The young man was terrified of being free as he realized what he was capable of. He had ample opportunity to think about his actions while confined, and he came to the conclusion that he would undoubtedly murder someone else if he were freed. He was repulsed by such thoughts and feelings and hated himself for them. Because he had a conscience, his lawyer subsequently referred to him as one of the most remarkable serial killers. Even up until the point at which he committed another murder, he felt bad about killing people. Because of what he had done, he detested himself, but the desire to kill came back, and he gave in and killed once more. It's a really odd behavioral pattern. However, when he turned 23 in 1977, he was set free. He made friends with a teenage boy after relocating to Chicago 2 years later. Although it appeared that they were friended, David occasionally felt the urge to stab the boy while he was staying overnight. David gave in to this overwhelming desire after they had another drink, and the teenager dozed off on the couch. He nearly disemboweled him by stabbing him in the abdomen with a knife, but the teenager lived. David was found guilty of attempting to kill someone. He was found not guilty, despite lying on the witness stand. We don't know what he said to convince them. Maybe he was also a devilishly convincing person when needed. David had not been able to learn to control his desires by the time he was 27. He remembered the kiss at the orphanage when a boy came up to him, trying to figure out what was happening to him. He hypothesized that his bad behavior stemmed from this unpleasant, intimate experience. He therefore made the decision to track down and murder that boy, who was now a man. He thought he could stop his destructive impulses and desires by doing this. He therefore embarked on a quest to target this man with his anger. But he found out that the man was incarcerated when he got to the location where the boy had lived. Therefore, David wasn't the only person who got into trouble after leaving that orphanage. He was unable to control his urge to kill or vent his anger on his offender. Then he saw a 15-year-old boy named Donald Jones going by his car. He was utterly innocent and just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Under the pretense of a straightforward odd job, David persuaded the teenager to get into the car and drove him to a remote location with quarries. Like his last victim, he stabbed Donald multiple times in the abdomen. He later described in his diary how the boy repeatedly pleaded with him not to be killed, saying, "Don't kill me, I'm only 15 years old." Nevertheless, David was powerless to stop himself. Then, unable to leave the teenager alone, he led him to the section of the quarry that was flooded. The teen died. David left the town without waiting for the body to be found. He was aware that Galveston, Texas, was where his uncle resided. David was given a job in his construction company and was permitted to live with his uncle. Once more, David demonstrated that he was a great worker, but after he unintentionally damaged the company van, his uncle fired him. The situation worsened. He offered a 14-year-old boy alcohol and illegal drugs when he invited him to his hotel room, but instead he started beating him. He stopped abruptly, as though the regular David took over and realized he had committed this terrible deed. Embarrassed, he dropped the weapon and started crying. David was given a 5-year sentence and the boy lived. He once more believed that he would carry on killing if he were released from prison. He was extradited to Chicago in 1982 in connection with the murder of Donald Jones, after investigators began linking him to the Donald case. They kept him in a mental health facility for a long time because they didn't think he was competent to stand trial. But in 1994, after waiting for a trial for 10 years, David acknowledged his guilt. He received a 35-year sentence. He was the most dangerous inmate the Illinois Department of Corrections would have, according to a report written by the Cook County prosecutor. He was even called a criminal on par with John Wayne Gacy by the sheriff. However, David Moust's sentence was lowered by 12 years because he had to wait 12 years for a trial and extradition. His remaining sentence was also reduced by 2 years due to his excellent behavior while incarcerated. In a 6-page letter to the Illinois Department of Corrections, David expressed his desire to remain incarcerated and acknowledged that he was unable to control himself. Illinois had a law at the time that permitted a convicted sexual assault offender to voluntarily serve out the rest of their life in prison. When given this choice, David wrote back, "Bring the papers, I'll sign everything," but no one approached him. His attorney claims that the letter was never even read, and he was freed from detention in 1999. Following a subsequent release, David relocated to Oak Park, Illinois. A year later, he attacked his friend Anthony by striking him on the back of the head with a metal pipe, despite his hope that a new place to live would allow him to start over. It would seem reasonable to assume that the police would deal with him more severely this time, but since Anthony was a former gang member who didn't want to involve the police and wouldn't testify against David, no charges were even filed against him. After his parole expired in 2002, David made the decision to relocate once more, this time to Hammond, Indiana. He discovered a local job that frequently involved and was frequented by teenagers. Employers were already able to investigate the backgrounds of potential hires by that point. David was just permitted to work with young boys in spite of his history of abusing teenagers. He soon fell back into his old routine, going to public pools and other places where teenagers congregated. By assigning the boys what appeared to be easy tasks, he gave them chances to make money. No teen would turn down the opportunity to make some cash by performing an apparently simple task, but these tasks turned out to be sinister. This went on until the disappearance of James Rainey, 16, and Michael Dennis, 13. That summer, David had made friends with these boys at the public pool and invited them to his house. The boys disappeared on September 10, 2003, the last time they were spotted. Given Michael and James's disobedient behavior, the police initially thought they might have simply fled. Therefore, the disappearance of Nick James, 19, on May 2, 2003, garnered more attention than the disappearance of these two boys. Nick James's family had been putting pressure on the police for months, and he wasn't rebellious. Investigators looked into his background after discovering that he shared a store with David Moust. They asked him to take a polygraph test because they had no proof, and he passed. He said he hadn't seen them in a while, which was pretty much accurate, but they didn't inquire as to whether he had murdered the boys. Investigators chose to search David's home even though he passed the polygraph exam. In 2003, the canine-wielding officer, Emo, was on the hunt for bodies. In order to search David Moust's basement, the police invited the dog and its handler. The dog started barking at the basement's far wall when the officer gave Emo the order. The handler told investigators that although the dog had been trained to pretend to dig, this behavior was strange because the dog was acting against its training. However, there had to be a reason why the dog wouldn't leave that specific location, so it was necessary to break through the concrete and investigate what was behind it. They were asked to go back to the same house a week later. Nothing was discovered when officers dug a deep hole in the floor. They went around and drilled a longer hole, but they were unsuccessful, so they gave up. They requested that they bring the dog back. He went straight to the hole this time and lay down. Since the officer was unable to record this, he asked the handler to give the dog another command. The dog then went to another hole and lay down again. After bringing in a concrete specialist, police discovered that David had used a staggering 80 bags of concrete. This was obviously done to conceal something, most likely bodies. 3 bodies were discovered when the police finally removed the concrete. Along with Nick, David had buried James and Michael beneath the basement after suffocating them in his apartment. David's brother and mother, who hadn't spoken to him in a long time, suddenly showed up. In numerous interviews, Jeffrey questioned whether the events could have been avoided had the police taken notice of David sooner. He claimed that his brother had committed horrible things when he was younger, but he had no proof. In addition, his brother and mother, who had not spoken to David in a long time, appeared to be desperate for attention. Jeffrey even had aspirations of becoming a writer. Thomas Wayne, his lawyer, claimed that although David was a serial killer, he wasn't born that way. The lawyer genuinely thought that his childhood was the recipe for making a serial killer, if anyone was looking for it. He never learned how to interact with others or live in society. David entered a guilty plea to the killings in November 2005 and received 3 life sentences. David died in January 2006 at the age of 51. He confessed to 5 murders, including 3 in Hammond, in a note discovered in his cell. He expressed his disappointment in not receiving a death sentence because he believed he deserved it. He felt that he would not have committed as many crimes if he had been kept out of the public eye. He also didn't want his existence to be funded by taxpayers. He accepted responsibility for his actions and begged the families of the victims for forgiveness. He only blamed himself, not his parents or upbringing. David wrote that although he loved his family, they never loved him back. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On a gray autumn day, a young Parisian girl, as usual, was returning home from school, hoping to remove her heavy backpack and grab a snack. However, as she approached her apartment building, she encountered a young girl who initiated a conversation with her. It took little effort for the girl to persuade the young girl to accompany her to her apartment. The schoolgirl probably didn't notice anything unusual about this because, after all, she was a petite girl, not an unfamiliar man whose mind could be filled with a variety of ideas. Furthermore, they were neighbors and lived in the same building. The girl followed her new acquaintance into the apartment, but as soon as she entered, the door slammed shut, and a nightmare began that is difficult to describe in words. Lola Davy, 12, disappeared and was never seen again. The date was Friday, October 14, 2022. Johan and Delphine Davy waited for their daughter Lola to return from school. The girl was aware that on Fridays the family would travel to their family cottage in Béthune, which was 3 hours away from Paris. As a result, she understood that she should not linger. Lola was an extremely obedient child who never went anywhere without permission. The school was only 200 meters from her house, so she should have arrived at any moment. So, when the clock went past 4 p.m., when their daughter didn't arrive, the parents knew something had happened. Johan and Delphine Davy lived and worked in this building. It meant that Johan could check the surveillance cameras to see if his daughter had entered the building. To his surprise, the girl had arrived 45 minutes earlier, and she was not alone. She entered with a girl who the man did not recognize. The girl made a hand gesture, as if inviting Lola to accompany her. According to the video, the girl lacked confidence and the young woman appeared uneasy. The parents handed over the photo of the unknown girl to the police. Delphine also shared her photo on Facebook, stating that her daughter was missing. She described how the girl was dressed and said she was last seen with an unfamiliar young girl. The woman urged anyone with information to contact police or the Davy family. Thousands of concerned citizens shared the post. People took to the streets to assist in the search for the girl. The search lasted several hours until 11:20 p.m., when a homeless man entered the inner courtyard of Lola's family home. Maybe he was looking for somewhere to sleep or something similar. Regardless, his focus was drawn to a large plastic suitcase. What he discovered inside the suitcase caused him to rush to find a police officer. Inside, the police found Lola's lifeless body. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was asphyxia. In addition, she had a deep wound on her throat and bruises and cuts all over her body. The perpetrator bound Lola's hands and feet before placing her in the suitcase, leaving a strange final mark on her soles. The numbers 1 and 0 in red ink. The last person to see her alive was the girl who appeared alongside her on the surveillance cameras. But who was she? It didn't take long for the cops to find her, and when they did, their hair stood on end as they heard the chilling story of Lola's murder. The investigators decided to review the footage that the girl's father had begun watching an hour and a half after Lola returned home with the stranger. The same girl left the house. She changed into different clothes and carried a suitcase and 2 smaller wheeled bags. It was the same kind of suitcase that they later discovered Lola in. It became clear that the mysterious stranger was somehow involved in Lola's situation. The police decided to question potential witnesses to see if they knew where the girl went after she left the building. It turns out she had unsuccessfully asked passersby for assistance with the bags because they were heavy and she was struggling to handle them herself. Despite their usual friendliness and helpfulness, the French people did not help the girl. Perhaps it was because she appeared and acted strangely. Her makeup had smudged and she muttered something to herself. She eventually stopped by a cafe and purchased a croissant. Meanwhile, the suitcase stood in the middle of the street, and pedestrians were curious what was inside because, according to some witnesses, it smelled of chlorine and had some red stains. However, it was clear that no one could have predicted that there was a person's body inside. One witness, who proved to be a valuable resource for the police, also saw the girl enter the cafe. She approached him, asking if he could give her a ride. The girl offered him a reward for his assistance and explained that she needed to transport organs. In other words, she invited him to participate in an organ trafficking scheme. The man became scared and refused to give her a ride. However, he parked his car slightly behind her and watched what she did next. The girl appeared distraught and was speaking to herself. It seemed strange to him, so he kept watching. The car arrived at 6:30 p.m. The driver loaded the suitcase and bags into the trunk before driving away with the strange girl. It did not take long for the police to locate the car driver, Rashid N., a chauffeur for the VTC company. He confirmed that he knew the mysterious girl named Dabia bin Kayad, who was 24 years old, and that they had previously dated. Xavier called him and asked for assistance with her belongings. He arrived as requested and did not ask too many questions. Rashid drove Dabia to his home in All ASU Boys, a Paris suburb. There, the girl requested permission to do laundry and took a shower. She borrowed his clothes while her own were being washed. Around 10 p.m., they went out to eat and returned when Dabia was ready to go home. Rashid, on the other hand, stated that he had only brought her there and had no plans to return at the time. Nevertheless, he requested another VTC vehicle for her. The arriving taxi driver noticed the passengers' heavy suitcases and rushed to assist, but Rashid rudely refused and instructed him not to touch the luggage, either now or later. The girl got into the car, mentioned an address, and they drove off. When they arrived, without getting out of the car, the girl called someone. The conversation was held in a slightly raised tone. Debbie asked for assistance, but it was refused. It was later discovered that she had called her sister, who lived in the same apartment building as Lola's family. Debbie requested that her sister come down, let her into the house, and assist her in carrying the suitcase and bags up to the apartment. However, the sister, clearly aware of what Debbie represented, stated, "I will not help you. I don't want to know what's in those bags, so don't bring them here." Unable to come up with a solution, Debbie dragged the suitcase and bags into the house's inner courtyard and threw them there. She then called a friend and asked to spend the night at his place. After getting rid of the suitcase, Debbie appeared to calm down completely, and she and her friend spent an entirely ordinary evening laughing and having fun, as if nothing had happened. Debbie was arrested just 2 days after being captured on camera with Lola. The police tried to learn everything they could about the girl. She moved to France from Algeria 6 years ago with her mother and 2 sisters. In 2018, 2 years after moving, the police heard Debbie's name, but as a victim of domestic violence. Her relatives and friends described her as deeply religious, and her ex-boyfriend even claimed that she was obsessed with the church. They did, however, explain that she changed after her father died while still in Algeria, and her mother died of cancer in 2020. Debbie was unable to cope with the loss and began talking to herself, becoming increasingly aggressive and unstable. However, it is known that she experienced fits of rage prior to her mother's death. She had a confrontation with the hospital administration in July 2019 when she was asked to pay for the medical treatment she received. Debbie became enraged and attacked the staff, claiming that she did not ask to be treated and should not have to pay for it. When she was escorted out of the building, she threatened to return, saying they had no idea what she was capable of. Despite her outburst of rage, the girl had no need to be taken to the police. When she was arrested in August 2022, the girl was no longer a student and had no right to remain in the country. However, because she had no criminal record, she was released and given a 30-day window to complete her paperwork or leave the country. But the girl did not do either. She simply vanished from the sight of the official authorities. She didn't work, didn't have a permanent home, and was officially homeless, despite having moved in with her sister. Her older sister admitted that Debbie had been exhibiting obvious mental issues for some time. She couldn't handle failure, and whenever she was told no, she would explode. However, Debbie refused treatment and her sister had no idea what else she could do. During the interrogation, Debbie admitted her guilt in the incident several times before retracting her statements. When the police showed her the footage of how they found Lola, she claimed she didn't feel hot or cold from it. She also stated that she had been mistreated and that her parents died before her eyes. She told the investigators that she lured Lola into her sister's apartment and forced her to undress and shower. The autopsy confirmed that Debbie assaulted her, tied her hands and legs, and taped her face with duct tape. As a result, Lola lost consciousness and eventually her life. Debbie went about her business as usual, drinking coffee and listening to music. Then, for unknown reasons, she slashed the lifeless body with either a knife or scissors. Later, Debbie abruptly retracted her statements, claiming that she would never commit such an act against a child, and accusing an unknown armed individual of the crime. She then revealed that she wasn't fighting Lola, but a ghost. Later, she returned to her initial confession, and it appears that the investigators were able to uncover an even more bizarre and inhumane motive for the crime. Debbie stated that shortly before the murder, she approached Lola's mother and addressed her as the building administrator where her sister lived. She requested an electronic card, a pass to the building, so that she could come and go whenever she wanted without having to ask her sister to let her in. Delphine had such authority because she did not live in the building but was a guest of her sister. Debbie, who refused to accept no for an answer, harbored resentment toward Delphine, and when she saw her daughter on the street, an exact replica of her mother, fury boiled inside her, and she resolved to seek vengeance. In other words, she committed the murder because, at the age of 24, she was not used to being denied and expected all of her wishes to be granted. Investigators believe that at some point, the attack moved from the apartment to the basement of the multi-story building, where they discovered clear signs of fighting. However, the police are still unfamiliar with certain aspects. Certain details, such as the numbers on Lola's legs and Debbie's admission that she drank her blood, suggest a ritualistic nature. In any case, the police confidently dismissed the black market organ trafficking theory. They see it as just another stroke in the accused's psychological profile. Debia has been charged with murder, torture with violence, cruel treatment of a minor under the age of 15, and concealing a body, all of which carry a maximum sentence of 30 years in prison. However, it is possible that she was not acting alone. Initially, police arrested 5 more people. First and foremost, Debia's sister was arrested because everything occurred in her apartment and the basement of her home. However, the police later determined that she had no knowledge of the crime and was not at home at the time. The other 3 suspects were also released fairly quickly, and their names have not been revealed. Rashid, Debia's former boyfriend, 43, has been charged with concealing the corpse. The girl claims he is the mastermind of the crime. It doesn't help him that he turned down a taxi driver who offered to help Debia with her suitcase. Those words also raise suspicions about the man. Did he know what was inside? He claims he didn't know what was in the suitcase, didn't open it, and had no idea what was inside. In the first week of November, a closed hearing was held in this case. The judge noted that the accused appeared completely calm at the time. The main question is whether Debia's crime was the result of a nervous breakdown or a desire to exact revenge on Delphine. If she is discovered to be mentally unstable, she will be treated by psychiatrists in a suitable specialized facility. If she is found competent to stand trial, she will be prosecuted. In early December, the psychiatrist who examined Debia submitted his report to investigators. He described her as extremely dangerous but not mentally ill. In other words, while she is not completely stable, this does not render her insane or incapable of being held accountable for her crime. She is fully capable of admitting that her actions were terrible and illegal, and that she should be judged for them. Of course, Debia's lawyers will most likely request additional consultations with psychiatric specialists. The defendant is currently being held in solitary confinement at France's second-largest prison, Fresnes, which is located slightly east of Paris. According to media reports, she rarely goes for walks and prefers to watch TV. According to reports, whenever she sees herself on television, she expresses joy and does not conceal her pride in herself. Debia had been living illegally in France for several months prior to the crime, so politicians used this story to bring up issues that were important to them. They quickly declared that France's anti-legal migration measures are deficient because migrants are responsible for many crimes in the country. In other words, if Debia had been deported sooner, Lola would still be able to attend school, participate in gymnastics and figure skating, and spend time with her parents and older brothers. However, Lola's parents believe that politicians are using their daughter's tragic death to score political points. Johan and Delphine have decided that staying in Paris is too difficult, so they have left for Pas-de-Calais, where they originally came from. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.